If you do not want to change, if you do not want to better yourself, if you do not want to break outside of this matrix, if you want to live in your comfortable delusion that they have built for you, do not watch these videos. Leave this channel immediately. If you do not want any truth, if you don't want to understand, if you are not here to hear something that's outside of your own mind and accept others' minds and opinions and the way they think for themselves, you do not belong here. And finally, if you are not trying to be positive, if you are not trying to help create solutions while we discuss the problems and how they got here, you do not belong here. Negativity, hate, disrespect, name calling, those things will not be allowed here on this platform and not in this empire. We are the ones, the true Americans that want to be free and stand as we have always stood.
Smoked in the dark, hella cooking shit up. If your ass wanna spar, barbecue your beef up like the seats in my car. Cool yourself off refrigerator and jar. Baby rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh, you forgot about that part. Lady rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh, you forgot about that.
Hey, what up, guys? How y'all doing today? You know it's time. We had to turn up. It's after work, and you know we got a show. All right. So today was a lovely day. I gotta do something real quick. So just forgive me for a moment. All right, let's see if that worked. If it did work, awesome. Everything should be trying to catch its flow up again. Just give it a few moments and it should catch up with itself. Now, I definitely have to shout out to everybody that went to work today. I'm feeling great. I know those last few episodes you guys saw me, I wasn't feeling so great. I took medicine, I cleansed, I did all these things, fasted and stuff, and now I feel amazing. All right, so we got to stick it through. Always stick it through. Okay, whatever it is, you got to see it through. Anytime you start something, finish it. Make sure the choice is always good. The things that are positive are the things that we want to do ultimately. Otherwise, yeah, we're it's all good. It's all good. Everything is cooling. All right, so I am definitely feeling like the world is a little twisted right now, but I think a lot of people are slowly waking up one by one. The little light switch, the little light bulb. You know, people are starting to wake up to what's really going on, and you know it's a good thing. It's a good thing because there's a certain point where accountability is gonna come in. A lot of people that have done a lot of things that are not good, everything's gonna be accounted for here shortly. AI is moving in a direction with these robots, in a direction with, you know, all these other things all together. So we actually have to we got to pay attention to the trends. We got to pay attention to society. We got to pay attention to everything. The things they're teaching in school to the children, what constitutes as the curriculum for a specific job market, right? Or job position. See, the curriculum that's required for a BA for what? Electronic, what? Digital who? Coding, programming, things like this. Oh, yeah, AI can do that, right? So are these degrees going to be necessary in the future? Yes. Now, the thing is, AI is going to replace the average person's job. But to fix the AI and to make sure the machines are fixed when there's an issue that the machine can't come up with because it doesn't have innate creativity, it's gonna need a me or a you or whoever does that job. So that's why these markets for controlling AI are gonna get bigger. People are gonna have to be smarter than the computer. The things that are relevant in school today are not gonna be relevant in school tomorrow. Understanding AI, learning AI, and the systems which created AI, all the way down to Linux, all the way back up to Microsoft and Apple and their different core foundations of their actual coding. Because you have to remember, the computer itself it's an electronic tool. I mean, it's a utility. We use it for things, but the way it was built is very specific. In order for it to work, it has to have certain mathematics, codes, foundations, and principles for certain operating systems to even have a platform. And then it's like you have a command to do a command to do a command to do a command. So it's like you're actually programming the chain of events that need to take place. Towards the end of it, you have to put a trigger to activate it. This is something computers are not very good at right now, or I might be explaining this wrong. By no way am I a programmer or anything like that. So coding, I just dabbled a little bit in Linux, and I was just trying to figure out some shit. So I'm still learning that as well. So make sure everybody, you're giving yourself the opportunity to learn new skills, build a new foundation. Remember, teach yourself how to learn again. Learning is something that's very important. If you forget how to do it, then you're pretty much stuck. Now, AI made a move, and so did the rest of the world. And the thing that's happening today in the world is it's a pretty... See, there's some things that have already happened that we don't even know, or it has not been publicized, or it's not a huge story. That's why we can't follow most of it. With this world that we're in, we have to give ourselves the opportunity to do better. We have to give ourselves the opportunity to do better. We can't just pretend like it's not our responsibility. I'm trying to decide if I even want to have the conversations with AI right now or any of that stuff. There's just a lot on my mind, and I don't really... Maybe I'm just working a lot lately. Maybe I'm just working too hard. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe I'm just working too hard. Maybe I'm just tired. But I proceed to bring up a few things here. I was watching PPD podcast today. I love the PPD podcast. Great podcast. Wonderful. I love how he does his thing. Everything is foundational. He does his research. He has experts. He did one of the last interviews with Kobe, and he also did the interview with Trump and a lot of different interviews from a lot of people that definitely are prominent, had a lot of good things to say, but that he's not very he's not biased. He comes at everything the way he should. He has an open mind. I appreciate it. The way they conduct their business over there, I love it. He has experience. He's a real man. He's a family man. Everything about PBD, the podcast, the platform, his team, I love it. What he's doing, that's the way all of us should be doing it. We should all be trying to do our best to, work with that man. If he decides to run for president, I'll vote for him. PBD for prez, you feel me? So that's where I'm at with it. Otherwise, we'll try to check some things out here. But I do see that there are some people out there in the world trying. So that gives me a little bit of hope. But I mean, you can only get what you get, right? But sometimes we have to make the things that we need. Let me see. I'll pull up my playlist because I did have a few things I was looking at earlier. I guess. Yeah, I guess we'll just do the war update thing. Why not?
Today, we will bring you all the details.
Wow. Really?
The United States is deploying the Dark Eagle, a new hypersonic missile battery ready to be used against Iran. And believe me, this is an extremely frightening weapon. The move also sends a very clear message to Moscow and Beijing. The game-changing weapon that the United States has still not used may soon reach deep into Iran. Today, we will bring you all the details. Is the war moving towards another round of fighting? The secret American plan to destroy the Revolutionary Guards in Iran is being exposed. In Iran, they are preparing for a scenario of renewed fighting, and they are threatening that they will reveal new capabilities. It also seems that Iran's military is threatening that they are on the verge of an extreme response to the United States. And it seems that right now, the Revolutionary Guards are running out of solutions. Because of the blockade, Iran is getting closer to breaking, and it is bringing an ancient technology back into use so it will not drown in oil surplus. And today, we will expose the intrigues at the top of the Iranian regime. Because apparently, Mustafa Khamenei is alive, but he's not controlling the Revolutionary Guards in Iran. And we will bring you all the details. And at the same time, the entire world is under pressure because besides the fact that the blockade is choking the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, it is also sending global oil prices soaring up. And the Israeli Navy launched a nighttime operation in the heart of the sea. Naval forces took control of the flotilla to Gaza. We will bring you all the details. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel and also the whole truth about what's happening in our neighborhood, the Middle East. And this is the opening of day 62 of the war, Roaring Lion, or by its American name, Epic Fury. An economic chokehold in the heart of the sea is taking place. The United States is reporting airtight enforcement of the naval blockade on Iran. The commander of the United States Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, revealed that so far, 42 attempts to violate the blockade have been thwarted. For 2 weeks now, American forces have been enforcing, with determination and courage, a tight naval blockade that's causing major disruption to Iran's economic trade routes. In new footage that we have, the activity of the fighters is being exposed, repelling from helicopters and also taking control of vessels. The estimated damage to the Iranian regime's treasury, more than $6 billion. The blockade is extremely effective, and we are committed to full enforcement, according to the Admiral said.
You don't know what an AI work management platform is? Yikes. Here's 3 new AI-powered changes.
Trump's, though, saying that he shows rejection of Iran's latest proposals, and he's preparing for a prolonged naval blockade. In simple words, Washington does not believe Tehran, and global markets are already responding with extreme price increases. And right now, on the table for the American military is preparation for strikes against infrastructure targets and an operation to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And behind the scenes, the United States is again trying to build an international coalition to open up the strait. Following the jump in oil prices, the American president spoke with oil companies in an effort to minimize the impact of the blockade on the sea routes around Iran. At the same time, the president proposed creating a new coalition in order to restore ship traffic in the Strait of Hormuz to normal. And of course, I have to point out that the president has an excellent sense of humor, as you know. Donald Trump published a photo today with a new name for the sea route. He called it the Trump Strait, or the Strait of Trump, instead of the Strait of Hormuz. And I'm sure that the people in the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are furious when they hear that. How do I know? Because the threats from the Iranians, they keep coming from every direction. Mustafa Khamenei is once again tweeting from the bunker this morning, writing that a new chapter is beginning in Hormuz. It is real. And this morning, Ayatollah Mustafa Khamenei is once again so-called broadcasting from the bunker without proof of life. We don't know if he's still with us or not. And declaring a new era without the United States and full Iranian control over the Strait of Hormuz. This comes as the United States continues to impose a naval blockade on passage through the Strait of Hormuz. The Speaker of the Iranian Parliament, Mustafa Bagher Ghalibaf, declares that the enemies failed to achieve their goals, and another senior regime official threatens that a ground invasion will end with the mass captivity of American soldiers. Senior figures in the Iranian chain of command are threatening that Iranian patience is reaching its limit, and that they are on the verge of an extreme response to the moves of the United States. Iran is taking a desperate step so it will not drown in surplus of oil. It's bringing all tankers back into operation in order to deal with the severe shortage of places to actually store the oil that they cannot export, while the American blockade closes in from all directions. And it's important to remember that Israel attacked and destroyed the emergency oil storage tanks at the beginning of this war. All the chaos in the regime comes from the fact that the Revolutionary Guards have completely taken over the government in Iran. Senior sources in Tehran revealed that the military arm of the Revolutionary Guards has taken full authority for itself, and Mustafa Khamenei is being used as a puppet. He's only a figure of legitimacy and communicates only through recorded messages. Right under Trump's nose, the Revolutionary Guards are managing to get tankers to bypass the blockade using a new method. An intelligence company reveals that Iranian tankers are penetrating and pretending to be Iraqi in order to bypass the American sanctions. And we are talking about oil worth of $800 million that is being smuggled through falsified location data. But it is important to remember that this is very small money compared to what the Iranian oil sales system used to be. In the Emiratis, they are outlining a strategy for the day after the war. At first, they assessed that the war against Iran, the closing of the Strait of Hormuz, and the United States blockade would unite the Gulf countries. But now, it seems that the main feature of the new strategy will be independent actions by the states, and probably a move closer to cooperation with Israel. We will bring you all the details very soon. And today, you really should stay with us, because we will bring you all the details about the new American missile. It's fast, precise, and terrifyingly expensive. The new weapon that will be deployed in the Middle East against Iran. I'm talking about the new hypersonic missile, Dark Eagle, which became operational only in 2025. It reaches a speed of Mach 5 and has a range of about 2,800 kilometers. The cost of each unit is estimated at $15 million. I'm Yair Pinto, with me is Mati Shoshani, and we are boots on the ground, bringing you the whole truth about what's happening in Israel. And this is day 61 of the war against the Revolutionary Guards in Iran, which is the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And 1 second before we begin, I want to call on you to keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click the subscribe button, and most importantly, do not forget to look for me, Yair Pinto, and for Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms so you can get our first-hand, behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to live in Israel under this war. Our senior Middle East affairs correspondent, Mati Shoshani, if Iran is really approaching the point of no return in the oil crisis, why is it still continuing to threaten instead of looking for a quick way out of this war?
Yeah, that is a great question. We're really in this very complicated and complex situation right now in the negotiation and in the war. And sadly, we're in a position where both the Americans and the Iranians don't have much of an incentive to change the status quo. Let me explain that. For the Iranians, first of all, if they go back to war, it doesn't improve their situation, it just degrades their situation. It makes things worse for them, it makes things more painful for them. But if they continue with business as usual, they continue blocking the Strait of Hormuz, they continue trying to run their proxy soldiers through Hezbollah specifically at the moment, well, it doesn't really cost them much aside from the financial loss. But if they negotiate and they give in to the requests made by the United States, and that's done publicly, that does cost them a lot. So they're doing what the Iranians always do. They draw out time, they waste time, they spread, they spread rumors about what they're planning to do, what they can't do, what they will do, and then they lie about what they said previously. And they're always playing this time game that's almost never ending, trying to wear away at the patience and the ability to be resolute and clear on the Western side. In the past, it's worked for them. Currently, it does not seem to be working for them. And you ask a valid question, well, why don't they give in? And we could talk about this for a lot, and for hours, but it's not in their DNA. Again, I'm not talking about necessarily the Iranian people, but the Ayatollah regime that leads Iran. It's not in their DNA, theologically, religiously, culturally, ideologically, to say something along the lines of, we were wrong and we're making a correction. That's not going to happen. That statement is not going to come out of their mouth. It's not going to be written. It's not going to be communicated verbally or in any other kind of way. They won't admit a mistake. They won't admit that they were wrong in what they did. They won't admit that their path was incorrect. There's two main reasons for that. One, they're dictators. They claim to be a people's republic. They claim to be to have elections. Let's be real here. When a country is passed from a father to son without any type of election, aside from a committee appointed by their friends and family, so to speak, or people in a similar outfit, as is the case in Iran, that's not a democracy. That's a dictatorship. And dictatorships don't admit mistake, and they don't admit weakness, and they don't admit that they lost. They always blame the outsiders. They always claim propaganda. They always claim fake information. They always lie to their people and to their enemies, as the Iranians do consistently. But there's another more important layer here, which is the religious layer. The Ayatollah regime is a theocracy. It's a government of religion. And governments led by religion claim to be sent by God. And if they're sent by God, you need to follow their logic for a second. If they're sent by God and they're doing God's bidding, then how could they possibly be wrong? So it's one of two options. Your faith is or wrong, or you fudge the facts. And they've gone down the second route, which is lie about what's actually happening. And in that equation of not being able to admit mistake, not wanting to show weakness, they never have a morning where they wake up and say, you know what? This whole violence and hating on Israel and the United States, we were wrong about that. Let's try something less extreme. Let's get rid of the head garb. Let's get rid of the supervillain outfit. That's not happening. Let's be clear here. What the Iranian regime does is it lies to its people and it spread violence, and it continues to do so until they no longer can govern the people of Iran. That will happen quickly or slowly, we're not entirely sure, but they're not going to admit defeat. And this is where the negotiation becomes super tricky, because for them to be able to walk away from a negotiation and say that they won, and also at the same time have the US think that they're happy with the outcome of that negotiation, that is a very, very complex equation that I'm not sure is easily solved by anyone who's negotiating currently. So short answer, the Iranians won't admit that they made a mistake because it's against their ideology, against their DNA. They won't call it quits because currently calling it quits, admitting mistakes, surrendering to the American demands will cost them more than the financial damage that the American blockade and continued pressure on them is currently costing them.
This week, we're hosting a free trading and investing workshop right here in Scottsdale. Inside.
Mati, what's the meaning of an American plan for a short and powerful wave of strikes? Is this a way to break the deadlock without being dragged into a long war?
That's a great question. We've been hearing about this CENTCOM Blitz operation in Iran for some time now. We know there are plans that have already been drawn up for what would be a concentrated wave of attacks against Iranian targets. I mean, think about it. The US doesn't go to war without having a substantial plan. And in this case, they have a very substantial amount of soldiers, of munitions, of vessels in the region that have battle plans of what happens in the hour, the day, the week that the negotiation officially ends, unsuccessfully, I should state, or that President Trump or the commander of CENTCOM says, we're going back to attacking the Iranians. When there's a short window of opportunity and you want to cause maximum damage, you need to know what targets you're going after first. And I can assure you, they have a very clear list of what's going to happen on the day that happens. But whether or not that kind of blitz attack is what really changes the outcome of the war, that's a little more complicated. And I need to really explain that for a second. This war can't be won, and hear me when I say this, it can't be won by military action alone. It can only be resolved fully with a diplomatic solution on top of the military. The military is important. The military is crucial. It is foundational for bringing any kind of substantial change to the current situation, but it won't end the war. Why is that? Because even if you did 30 more days of bombing Iranian targets and you bombed infrastructure and eliminated more of their leadership and more of their military production capabilities and buried even deeper into the ground the enriched uranium that they previously had and eliminated more of the scientists that carry the knowledge, you're not going to get to a place where there's nothing left that will allow them to keep fighting unless we do things that Western countries simply don't do, which is eliminate mass groups of population.
Now, y'all will notice I don't pause it and talk a lot during the war stuff because we already solved the war. So the fact that they're still having these conversations, it's irrelevant to me. I don't feel like talking right now. And I just want y'all to see that we could have already prevented all this. And I want y'all to listen to what's happening with the war and then think back to our plan. You know what I mean? And how we solve this. Because this is dumb. The fact that it's still going, whatever. This is just movie right now. It's just us watching TV together.
We're wrong. I'm not calling for that. I'm just stating the obvious here, which is these kind of wars don't end that way. They don't end the way World War II ends, you know, in the back of a trailer of a train where two governors shake hands and one hands over the papers and says, we surrender on behalf of the German people, the Japanese people, whatever. That day isn't coming, guys. Let's take it out of our vocabulary. The way this ends is with an agreement, because currently the Iranian regime is here to stay. They're not going anywhere. They don't seem to have lost their resolve to hold on to Iran as a country or as a people. And therefore, in sort of an obvious development of thought, the next thing that's going to happen is not necessarily going to be a military conclusion, but rather a diplomatic one. That doesn't mean, by the way, that there will not be another exchange of blows, because it is feasible. This is important to state. It is very feasible, in fact, that the Americans will get tired of the negotiation games of the Iranians and will carry out another series of strikes. We know they're prepared for this. We know that the plans already exist for that, but that won't be the move that ends the war. It will cause more damage to the Iranians. It will further weaken their government, further reduce their capability to wage war, but it won't limit it completely. And again, just to remind you of something we've been talking about a lot in recent days, in a war of asymmetrical nature, such as this war, where there's the strongest, best equipped, best trained army in the world, the American armed forces, facing a much lesser adversary, the Iranian armed forces, the IRGC, that are fighting against them using terrorism. Well, the war doesn't end when the armies are eliminated. The Iranian army has been long eliminated. That's not going to change. What needs to change is the regime needs to decide that it is no longer worthwhile for them to continue fighting against the American armed forces. More so, and we've seen this also in recent weeks, the Iranian regime is already weakened. It is already split into different factions that are fighting over power. And even when one of them commits to some version of a ceasefire or some version of ending the war, what ends up happening is other factions violate that very same agreement. We've seen this repeatedly in recent weeks, both in action and in public statements. So ending the war doesn't happen by yet another substantial strike. Another substantial strike could change the situation, but it doesn't ultimately end the war against Iran. That happens with an agreement, that happens through negotiation, or when the regime in Iran falls, whichever happens first. Which one it is, well, I'll leave that to greater and better than me, because we're not sure what's going to happen. We just know that the next step here is reaching a substantial, meaningful agreement with the Iranian regime.
And Mati, what does the Gaza flotilla affair reveal about the psychological and media campaign against Israel while the war against Iran and Hezbollah continues?
Yeah, I find it to be fascinating that amidst everything that's happening in the Middle East right now, the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, the civilian ships that have been attacked, the war in Lebanon, the fact that the Hezbollah terrorist organization is threatening the government of Lebanon with death if they try to comply or reach a ceasefire with Israel, with everything that's going on, the countries of Europe, or several entities with Europe, decided that the number one thing they need to do is to bring aid to the people of Gaza, to break, in their words, the siege of Israel on the Gaza Strip. Now, of course, there's some very substantial problems with the facts that they're trying to claim. The main one being is what they're saying is a lie. Let me explain. These flotilla ships are meant as propaganda tools. They're not actually bringing aid. Most times when they're, it's unveiled what's in those ships, it's a very small amount of aid and a lot of tools to generate propaganda, cameras, internet uplinks, etc. These people are coming for a show. They're coming for a publicity stunt. They're not actually coming to do anything meaningfully good for the people of Gaza. But more importantly, let's talk about the Gaza Strip itself. In the Gaza Strip, the war ended with a ceasefire, at the end of which Hamas, the terrorist organization, was supposed to be removed from the Gaza Strip, important note here, by Arab countries, by Muslim countries. That never happened for various reasons. Hopefully it will happen in the future. And the Hamas terrorist organization has gone back in the areas still under its control to recruiting children to fight on its behalf, to beating, stealing, and killing their own people to maintain control. And of course, to do what their favorite thing to do is to try and attack Israel. They have no reason to do this, by the way, aside from their ideology. But once again, what they do is try to carry out violent attacks against Israel. I'll add one more thing here. There is no blockade on the Gaza Strip. Israel moves in supplies on a daily basis. I've seen it with my own eyes. Yael, you've seen it with your own eyes. We've seen this time and time again. The trucks are coming in with all the food that these people need. But the big problem is Hamas isn't trying to rebuild the Gaza Strip. They're trying to destroy Israel. Gaza has never been their agenda, never been their interest. They're not even concerned with it. So these flotillas are a shipload of hypocrisy. That's what they really are. A bunch of people who mean no good. They're doing this because they want a virtue signal to the world about how virtuous they are and how evil everyone else is. They're looking for an easy win on a PR stunt that doesn't actually change anything on the ground. But when it came to, and I'm just going to summarize a few things that happened while this war was raging, to the ethnic cleansing of Christians in Africa, no flotilla. When it came to the Iranian regime, killing tens of thousands of its own people, no flotilla. When the Iranian regime started shooting ships full of Filipino or Thai or other nationality sailors in the Strait of Hormuz, no flotilla to save them. The Gulf states can't move goods, aside from through planes, in and out of their countries because of the blockade in the Strait of Hormuz. No flotilla to bring aid to the people of the UAE, or the people of the Saudi country, or the people of Oman. No flotilla over there. The only flotilla is always against Israel and against the Israeli Jewish people. That's always the case. It's an act of absolute hypocrisy that has no intention to really change things on the ground in Gaza. I want to tell you one more story, Yael, as we wrap this. This might be a little known fact to many people around the world, but for much of this is about a year ago, when Israel was bringing in aid into the Gaza Strip, Israel was distributing the aid through an aid organization called the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, an American organization. And there were UN organizations, and mark my words when I say this, there were government organizations of different countries in the world who, because Israel was the one distributing the goods, and because it would look good for the state of Israel to bring those goods to people, they publicly, behind closed doors, they prevented that aid from reaching the people in Gaza, and they refused to participate because they didn't want to do anything that would be politically beneficial for the state of Israel, even though it was feeding the people of Gaza. Mind you, they admitted publicly that the majority of the aid they were bringing into the Gaza Strip was stolen and resold by Hamas, the terrorist organization, and was thus funding the terrorist organization. So where's the disconnect here? The disconnect is the fact that these people don't care about the Palestinian people. They don't care about the people of Israel. They don't care about ending conflict. They don't care about ending suffering. What they care about is hurting the state of Israel, hurting the people of Israel, and any tool that they can use on the way to that to seem more virtuous, to seem like they're doing the right thing, they'll utilize that tool, they'll play that tune until it's absolutely done. And this is an example of that. The Middle East itself has been at war for months now. There are a lot of people that need aid. Go to southern Lebanon. These people have been ravaged by Hezbollah, who's been tearing through the country, has been causing unbelievable damage to that country, forcing them into war time and time again. No flotilla to come and help those people. The same goes to countless conflicts around the world, countless minorities that are being targeted. And if it's not about a Jewish person, well, no one cares about it. That's the reality over here. So see this flotilla for what it is. It is a political statement meant to harm Israel. It doesn't mean to bring aid to the people of Israel. And I'd add one last thing. If we really want to break the siege on the Gaza Strip, there's one clear address for breaking that siege, and that is Egypt. Egypt is the one who's built an entire wall complex, preventing anyone from the city of Gaza or the Gaza area from coming into the Sinai Peninsula that Egypt controls. They've even been reinforcing that barrier in recent months with both soldiers and physical barriers to prevent those people from coming in. So, and I know we're accustomed to this as Israelis. Hypocrisy is repetitive. Hypocrisy and hate of the Jews is historical, it's biblical, but we're always negatively surprised by how hypocritical, how duplicit in their values these people can be, sailing a freedom ship from Europe to people that already have food while ignoring the suffering of countless others when they could really use that money, use those resources to bring true help.
Yep. And thank you very much, Mati. This really helped me understand better what we are dealing with. And to all of you, keep spreading the truth. Share our content with as many people as possible. Click on the subscribe button and search for Yair Pinto and Mati Shoshani on our social media platforms. Also go to our website, tbnisrael.com, and subscribe to our newsletter. The ceasefire with Iran may be in place, but no one in Israel really believes that this is over. The missiles may have stopped for now, but the injuries, the trauma, and the need to stay ready and prepare, that hasn't gone anywhere. And through all of this,
producers, this plugin helps you finish your tracks way faster. Check this out. I'm gonna start with this loop that I made here.
who was there from the very start, from the very beginning? Magen David Adom. When the sirens went off, when the rockets hit, their teams, they were ready on the ground, treating the wounded, evacuating the injured, saving lives again and again. And now, even as things quiet down, they don't stop. They're restocking supplies, repairing ambulances, retraining teams, getting ready for whatever comes next because they know that it will come and they need to prepare. But to stay ready, they need support. They are entirely dependent on donations. And if you want to make a real difference in Israel, you can make a donation and save lives by going to savelifeisrael.com. Again, that's savelifeisrael.com. Help Magen David Adom stay prepared, strong, and fast so they can keep saving lives, whatever happens next. Israeli Navy forces operated overnight in open waters against the Shamud flotilla, which was making its way towards Gaza. The ships reported military boats that approached them, lasers and weapons aimed towards the activists, and disruptions to their communication systems. The IDF made clear that Israel is enforcing the maritime security blockade on the Gaza Strip, warning every vessel not to continue toward the coast. But this incident does not stand alone, because at the same moment that the Israeli Navy is stopping the flotilla on its way to Gaza, the United States Navy is stopping ships in the Persian Gulf, and Iran is trying to turn sea lanes into a tool of global blackmail. So, are we seeing just another maritime incident, or the beginning of a stage in which the sea becomes the central front of this war? I'm Yair Pinto. This is your Boots on the Ground report, closing day 62 of the Roaring Line War, or by its American name, Epic Fury. And this day begins at sea, but it takes us straight into the heart of the Iranian regime. For more than 2 weeks, the United States has been enforcing a tight naval blockade on the Iranian ports. The commander of the United States Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, announced that American forces have so far diverted 42 commercial vessels that attempted to violate the blockade. According to American figures, 41 oil tankers are stuck with about 69 million barrels of oil that are worth more than $6 billion, which Iran cannot sell. This is not just another sanction on paper. This is economic strangulation carried out in the middle of the sea. Ships are inspected, routes are blocked, ports are choked, and the Iranian system that is supposed to turn oil into money is beginning to jam. When the oil does not leave, the money does not come in. And when the money does not come in, the Revolutionary Guards lose the economic fuel that sustains the militias, Hezbollah, the Houthis, the smuggling networks, and the entire axis of evil that has been built around Israel for years. Iran's problem is no longer only who will buy its oil. The problem is where to put the oil that has not been sold. Oil continues to come out of the fields, of the wells, but the tankers are not leaving the ports. Land storage facilities are limited. Giant tankers are becoming floating warehouses. And once there is no more room, Iran is forced to reduce the production. That's where the real risk begins. An oil well cannot be turned off and back on like a light switch. A forced shutdown can damage reservoir, reduce and lower the pressure, allow water to come into the oil layers, block the pipelines, and require years of rebuilding and billions of dollars to restore the field and make it operational again. That is exactly why Tehran is bringing old ships back to life. The Iranian supertanker, Nasha, built in 1997 and was absent from tracking systems for years, was documented again at Karag Island, Iran's main oil export terminal. This is not a sign of strength, it is a sign of distress. Iran is searching for every floating vessel, every oil tank, every old tanker, every temporary solution so it does not drown in its own unsold oil. The energy market is already feeling the pressure. Oil prices have jumped to highs not seen in years. Brent crude is trading around $126 a barrel, and American oil is climbing above $110. The Strait of Hormuz, one of the most important energy routes in the world, no longer a pipeline for global trade. It now functions like a pressure valve. Every Iranian threat, every American plan, and every tanker stop moves the markets. Everything is connected. Trump understands this very well. He sees the naval blockade as a central pressure lever, maybe even more effective than airstrikes. The idea is simple, not to reopen the entire war, but to let time work against Iran. Every day that the oil remains stuck, the regime pays a price. Every day that the ships do not move, the Revolutionary Guards lose money. And every day that the market sees Tehran does not truly control Hormuz, Iranian deterrence erodes. But the blockade is not the end of the story. It is only the first layer. Trump is expected to receive a briefing from the CENTCOM commander on new military options against Iran. One of the plans on the table is a short and powerful wave of strikes, likely focused on infrastructure targets, in order to break the deadlock in the negotiations. Another plan deals with taking control of parts of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it for commercial shipping. Another possibility involves a special forces operations to secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. There is a double message here. On one hand, Trump is still giving the blockade time to war. On the other hand, he's making sure that Iran sees the gun on the table. The United States Navy, the forces in the Gulf, CENTCOM briefings, and preparations for rapid operations are all meant to tell Tehran, you still have a narrow window to surrender on the nuclear issue, but that window will not remain open forever. A new and especially frightening American weapon also enters this picture, Dark Eagle. The United States Central Command is seeking to deploy the new hypersonic missile in the Middle East, a weapon that only recently became operational. This missile reaches speeds of about Mach 5, has a range of about 2,800 kilometers, and each unit is estimated to cost around $15 million. Its advantage is clear. It is fast, accurate, and extremely difficult to intercept. If it's deployed in the region, the message will not be directed only at Tehran. It will also be heard in Moscow and Beijing. On the Iranian side, they're trying to project power. But as the pressure grows, the threats grow more nervous. Senior figures in the Iranian chain of command warn that patience is reaching its limits and speak of a possibility of an extreme response against the United States. Senior regime officials view any interference with Iranian oil tankers as a direct threat to the survival of the local economy. Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the Speaker of the Iranian parliament, claims that the enemies have failed, while Mohsen Razai threatens that any American ground invasion would end with mass captivity of the American soldiers. These are not ordinary threats. These are the threats of a regime that understands that it is losing control over its main source of income. Iran can say that the blockade is not working. It can claim the oil will keep flowing. It can display messages, missiles, drones in the streets of Tehran. But if it is bringing all tankers back into service, if it is searching for floating storage, if it is demanding the removal of the blockade as a condition for any progress, that means the blockade is hitting exactly the right place. Inside the Iranian leadership, another drama is unfolding. Mustafa Khamenei is alive, but the main question now is, where is he, how, and who is he controlling? Because internal Iranian sources describe the reality in which the Revolutionary Guards hold the practical power, while Mustafa mainly serves as a figure who gives religious and governmental legitimacy to decisions that have already been made. He does not appear in public. He communicates mostly through recorded messages or assistants, and the generals are the ones actually managing the campaign. This is a very important point because in negotiations with Iran, the problem is not only what Iran wants, the problem is who is even authorized to say yes or no. The president can speak, the foreign minister can travel, the mediators can offer formulas. But if the Revolutionary Guards hold the real key, every diplomatic proposal may get stuck the moment it appears and approaches the core of the problem: nuclear missiles, Hormuz, and Hezbollah. Tehran is now trying to turn Hormuz into a rescue card. The Iranian proposal is simple and dangerous. First, open the strait, remove the blockade, bring oxygen back to the economy, and only then let's talk about the nuclear issue. From Iran's and the Americans' point of view, that's exactly the trap. Iran wants to receive oxygen before paying a real price. It wants time to hide equipment, time to rebuild the launchers, time to move uranium, time to reactivate smuggling networks, and time to return the Revolutionary Guards to a position of strength. That's why Donald Trump rejected the proposal. He's not willing to remove the blockade only to hear vague promises. The American demand remains clear. There is no deal without real action on the nuclear program. And meanwhile, to strengthen the pressure, Washington is promoting a new international coalition around the Strait of Hormuz. The goal is to share intelligence, coordinate diplomatically, help enforce sanctions, and restore freedom of navigation without allowing Iran to decide who passes and who does not. Donald Trump, of course, did not miss the opportunity to add some psychology to this war. He shared an artificial intelligence image in which the Strait of Hormuz receives a new name, the Strait of Trump. For the Revolutionary Guards, this is humiliation. For Trump, it is a way to say that the Iranians have lost control of their most important asset.
The Strait of
And for the
Trump.
global market, it's another sign that the battle
sorry.
over Hormuz is no longer only military, it is also psychological. And before we continue, if you understand how important it is to know what's happening in this region, we call on you to help us. Help us spread the truth. You can like this report, you can share it with your friends, your family, and anybody who needs to understand the Middle East without filters. And do not forget to click on the subscribe button here on YouTube to understand, be updated, and to know how to pray for the situation. And while the sea is burning, the northern front of Israel is not calming down either. In southern Lebanon, the IDF continues to expose what Hezbollah tried to hide for years. In the Kantara area, a large tunnel infrastructure was uncovered, about 25 meters deep and roughly 2 kilometers long, only about 10 kilometers from the border with Israel. Inside the tunnels, forces are finding living rooms, water tanks, weapons, anti-tank missiles in the tunnels, and infrastructure designed to allow Radwan commando forces of Hezbollah to prepare for a raid toward the galley. This is not just another shaft. This is an underground terror city. It was built to allow terrorists to live beneath the ground, wait for the order, emerge quickly, and try to carry out what Israel learned after October 7th, that it must never underestimate again. Infiltration into communities, attacks on families, and the creation of national shock. The difference is that this time, the IDF arrived before the order was given. Hezbollah is not satisfied with tunnels alone. In southern Lebanon, weapons were also found inside civilian areas. This is including reports of weapons that are hidden in a children's room. This is the method: a launcher near a home, a warehouse near a family, a shaft near a road, an ambulance hiding weapons, and then, when forces operate, the organization tries to sell the world a story about villages being attacked. Ambulances being attacked, but in reality, Hezbollah turned the villages and the ambulances of South Lebanon into Iranian tools of war. In recent days, explosive drones launched towards the IDF forces have also continued. Israel identifies this threat as a major operational challenge. Small drones, cheap, more accurate, and harder to detect in time. The Prime Minister said an order has already been given to advance a special project to deal with the drone threat in southern Lebanon. It will not happen in one day, but the message is clear. Israel does not intend to allow Hezbollah to restore the old equation of attrition. Alongside this, it was reported that an Israeli UAV was shot down in Lebanon after a surface-to-air missile launch. In the same area, 5 Hezbollah terrorists were also eliminated, and the organization continues trying to operate explosive drones and test the limits of Israel's response. But the reality in the north has changed also. Israel is no longer settling for containment. Every warehouse, every launcher, every piece of terrain, and every attempt to rebuild power becomes a target. This is where Lebanon connects again to Iran, because Hezbollah is not only a Lebanese problem, it is an Iranian arm. The tunnels in southern Lebanon, the drones, the anti-tank missiles, and the concealment among civilians, all of these belong to the same doctrine that comes from Tehran. Iran builds a wall without standing on the border itself. It sends money, knowledge, weapons, advisors, and waits for the moment when another front can be opened against Israel. And at the same time, diplomatic efforts are taking place with Lebanon. But Israel knows there is no real arrangement as long as Hezbollah holds weapons and decides for itself whether the Lebanese state has authority over it or not. Foreign Minister Gideon Saar emphasized that negotiations are important, but the Lebanese government must take practical steps to restore sovereignty. In simple words, you cannot speak about a state while a terrorist organization holds an entire country hostage. This war has crossed much further borders. In London, 2 Jewish men were stabbed in the Golden Green neighborhood in an attack that was declared terrorism. The 2 wounded men, aged 76 and 34, were evacuated to the hospital and were in stable condition. The terrorist is a 45-year-old British citizen born in Somalia. He was arrested after being neutralized by police and by local volunteers. An Islamist organization called Ashab el-Yamin, identified as a group linked to Iran, claimed responsibility for the attack. The footage from the scene is hard to watch. A terrorist chases Jewish people in the street, attacks an elderly man at a bus stop, and tries to continue harming people until he is stopped. But the story is not only London. In recent weeks, there have been also reports of ambulances belonging to the Jewish community being set on fire, attempted arson attacks against synagogues, and attacks on Jewish institutions. Israel warned Britain that statements are not enough. When anti-Semitism becomes terror attacks in the streets, action is needed, not only condemnation. And that is what Iran's the broader war that Iran is waging looks like. It is present in Hormuz through the blockades and the ships, the mosquito fleet. It is present in Lebanon through Hezbollah. It is present in Yemen through the threats against the Bab el-Mandab. And it appears in Europe through incitement, extremist cells, and violence against Jews. Not every event is directly controlled from Tehran, but the spirit, the incitement, and the interest all connect to the same axis. And within all of this, there is another significant movement in the Gulf. The United Arab Emirates is signaling a deep change in the energy market with a move to leave OPEC and OPEC+. For years, this cartel served as a tool to regulate prices, limit production, and create power for all states. Now, a Central Gulf country is essentially saying, we want to act independently. If the Emiratis increase the production the day after the crisis, it can weaken the power of Iran and Russia and change the global energy balance. This is also a strategic blow to the anti-Western axis. Iran needs high prices of oil to fund the Revolutionary Guards and its proxies. Russia needs high oil prices for the war in Ukraine. If Gulf states begin to act more with the United States and Israel and less within the framework that also serves Tehran and Moscow, the whole region changes. Meanwhile, inside Iran, the crisis has already entered the people's homes. Inflation is soaring, factories have been hit, jobs are disappearing. Prices of basic food products have risen by tens of percent. Citizens see the currency eroding, the oil stuck, and the regime continues to speak about the victory that's not coming. This is where the strategic war becomes daily reality. In the supermarket, in the paychecks, at the gas stations, and in the facilities that cannot return to work.
Atera is the IT painkiller. Remote monitoring and management, remote access, help desk and ticketing, smart automations, patching, software deployment.
The regime is betting that the Iranian public will hold out longer than the political pressure on Trump. Trump is betting that the regime will break before the world gets tired of the oil prices. Israel is watching both sides and understands that time is dangerous, because every day in which Iran is not defeated is also a day in which it can rebuild, hide, transfer, and plan the next stage. And that's exactly where day 61 ends. Not in real quiet, but intense quiet. The blockade is working, but has not yet forced a decision. Iranian threats are growing, but have not yet become a full move. The IDF is dismantling Hezbollah infrastructure, but the organization is still trying to test the border. Trump is keeping the military option on the table, but still allows time to work. Day 62 closes with Iran choking at sea, Hezbollah exposed underground, and the world understanding that this war is no longer being fought only in the air, but also in oil, tunnels, ships, and Jewish communities far from Israel. And if all of these fronts are already connected to one another, will the decision come through an agreement, through a blockade, or through another explosion that opens the next round? So keep spreading the truth. Follow us, share.
This is what I saw with that one, guys. This war is getting complicated. It's not a stalemate, but it's more like a strategical defensive posture. So I did want to check this out right here. I was watching this earlier. This is
Trump. Now you see the globalists. Now you see that there's.
Now the cool thing about this is the podcast I was talking about earlier. PBD goes hard. PBD is like hands down the best podcast, the best channel. Like every morning, every time it comes on, I gotta watch it. This is like not only one of the best podcasts, this is one of the best newscasts. All right, they keep it 100. They got jokes too, so it could get funny, but this is one of the more serious interviews. And this is why I appreciate Patrick Bet David. This guy is awesome. There's nothing wrong with him. Even though he's not the perfect guy, you know, nobody's perfect, you know. He's the best example that I have as a man, and I would follow him any day. That's real. I'm trying to get my life together in a certain sense. Like I live the way I live because I want to live this way, and I made it this way, and I'm working towards having more and being able to do more for others. And I'm trying to put myself in a position where no matter what I do, no matter where I go, I'm going to be able to actually help the people that I come across, and hopefully kind of help them, what's the word, feel inspired and motivated to do better for themselves as well. So that's one of the things I'm working on within myself, and it's going to take a little bit, but I have to get myself in the right place. But you know, it is what it is, right? Everybody's got to try to get their humility cape on, right? Because in this world, we got to keep it real with each other. Like, we all go through stuff, so let's not just count that. I'm gonna go ahead and run these fun little bits, huh?
I've never seen anything like this.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of competence, coherence, singularity of purpose.
How much of this comes down to money? How much of it comes down to power? And how much of it is, if you got money, you got the power anyway. So how do you view what they're solving for long term?
They really believe that we're no better than animals. They just happen to have bluer blood, so they get to run us.
What I'm trying to figure out is who's influencing who? Who's elevating who has control over who?
These binaries are out there to keep you from looking at, again, what's generating the shadows on the wall.
I have a very, very hard time thinking Britain has the same kind of control and influence like they did before.
I think for long term, it's even more evil. I mean, they use the money, they use the power, but ultimately it comes down to an image of man.
Today we have a special guest with us, Susan Kokinda from Promethean Action, whom I get text messages of from my sister saying, you have to see what she has to say. So Susan, it's great to have you here on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So for some people who don't know, can we just qualify one thing that you're not, right? Because, you know, some people may look at you and say, is this Q from James Bond? Can you just qualify that you're not Q from James Bond? It's very important.
I'm definitely not Q.
Okay, well, thank you for doing that, because we don't want, people to go out there start saying, why is Pat talking to Q from James Bond? But your analysis, the way you break things down, very, very interesting, very different. And your story is very unique because is it true that you were at the RFK Senior's campaign? You were working with him in 1968, and you were there when the assassination happened, working with the campaign, not physically there, but you were on the campaign, as well as at the White House press pool at GW Hospital in 1981, after Ronald Reagan, the assassination attempt at the same hotel that the president just had the attempt a few days ago. Are those two true that you were there at those two events?
That's true. I was in San Francisco with the campaign in 1968. And then when the president was shot in 1981, I was covering a hearing on Capitol Hill, and all of a sudden I got the call, head over to GW Hospital and find out what's happening. So yes, I was there for both.
Now, at the time, where were you at politically? What was your cause? Because, was it, I want to help America because of these three issues? What was important to you at the time, both in 68 as well as 81?
Really, both was the same thing, which is that I sensed, even at the young age, which I was then in 1968, I sensed that something had gone very wrong, obviously with the assassination of JFK, that there was a change in direction in the country. And I didn't understand what it was early, but I knew there was just something that was going on that was taking us in a direction that was different, which had characterized especially the early JFK period, which was progress, which was science, which was technology. I was a child of the space program. I wanted to be an astronaut. And somehow all of that began to change. You began to see the emergence of the rock, drug, sex counterculture, which just seemed very strange to me. This kind of hedonistic approach, as opposed to this sense that the nation has a mission and you should devote yourself to a mission, not to what makes you feel good. So, again, it was unformed for a while. But then as I become more politically attuned and astute, I began to dig more deeply into what is causing this. And, by the time I was in Washington, D.C. in 1981, it was pretty clear that there was a deeper historical fight going on than I think most people were aware of. And I think they are now with Donald Trump. Now you see the globalists. Now you see that it's more than the newspaper headlines. It's more than the way the mainstream media portrays things.
Susan, what's different and what's the same?
From when? What's different?
Give me both of them. From 68, 81, what's different from today with President Trump, with the three different assassination attempts he's had in 68 and in 81?
Very, very different. I mean, because look, the MAGA movement has gone through a series, shall we say, of walls of fire. They went through COVID. They went through the stolen election. They went through J6. They went through the Butler assassination. I think there's a layer of the American population which has really grown up, which is increasingly looking behind the curtain and saying, this stuff just isn't random. It's like lone assassins. I mean, give me a break. People are ready to dive more deeply into it. One of my friends that I do podcasts with, Blaine Holt, says, if we were talking about the things we're talking about today, back then, people would be putting tinfoil hats on us. But now you've got millions, if not tens of millions of people thinking more deeply about what is actually driving these forces. And again, you want to make the comparison. Look at the comparison between how people have to live today and how people lived, say, in the middle 1960s. In the middle 1960s, a blue-collar income, like here in Detroit, could raise a family of 5 or 6 comfortably, one income, and have the confidence that your children would have a better life than you did if they worked hard. What have we gone through since NAFTA, since the 2008 bailouts, and everything that comes with that globalist system? You need 3 or 4 incomes, and you still can't make ends meet. You're giving half your income to daycare because mom has to work 2 jobs and dad has to work 3 jobs. And I think the support for Donald Trump, especially his recorded victories in 2016 and 2024, were a very clear response from a broad swath of the American population, including people who didn't used to vote Republican, like blue-collar workers here in Michigan, who said, I don't want to live like this any longer. I want that world where you've got progress, where you've got stability, where you've got opportunity, and you don't have to scramble, like a rat to figure out how to get to the end of the maze. So I think that's sort of the foundation of the fact that then opens a lot of people's minds to the fact that There's a bigger picture here. And I always go back to a quote from Scott Bessent, where he gave an interview it was actually about a year ago. And he said, look, the Democratic Party's strategy is to compensate the loser. He said, but I don't think the lower 50% are losers. I think they're winners, but the system is broken and we're going to fix the system. And I think that's extremely important because once people realize that it's systemic, the problems that have ruined their lives or made their lives incredibly difficult, it's an entire system. It's not their fault. It's an entire system, and this administration is committed to changing it. So it creates a different kind of environment, I think, where people can think more deeply, okay, well, what was wrong with the old system? And what is it that President Trump is trying to do? That's what we do at Promethean Action. We try and sort of translate for people. Hey, here's something that it looks new. It's frankly not. It used to be called the American system. But here's what the president is doing. And it actually is transformational. And maybe you need to calm down and hold on while this transformation takes place.
Now, question for you. That's very interesting when you're breaking that down. And I want to go a little bit deeper into that as well. But a lot of times today, if you were to look at different podcasters or influencers, if you watch mainstream media, the enemy is going to be, China or Qatar or Russia, right? That's going to be the enemy I'm not even Qatar. It's more going to be China or Russia. If you look at podcasters, streamers, independent content creators, you will hear Israel and you'll hear Qatar. But when you listen to you say Britain. Even one of the videos you recently did, you said the hidden hand behind Trump's assassination attempt, and it goes to Britain. And no one is saying that. So nobody is even talking about Britain, but you are. Tell us why Britain? Why are you thinking Britain's behind the third assassination attempt?
Well, if you actually look at the history of assassination attempts in the United States, and we actually have an ebook on the Promethean Action website, which is entitled "It is the British Who Murder Our Presidents." And if you look at President Trump's comments after the assassination, both in the press briefing and then in the outtakes from the 60 Minutes show, he says it's only consequential presidents who get assassinated or there are attempts. And he cites Abraham Lincoln and he cites William McKinley. And that's extremely important because those are the probably the most important American system presidents in our history. Now, why do I say that when you ask me about the British? Because if you look at the 19th century and our own the decades of our own founding, there were two systems in the world, and it wasn't capitalism or communism. Those phrases didn't even come along until Karl Marx. The two systems in the world were the American system versus the British imperial system. And the British imperial system was based on power, money, perpetual wars, controlling resources, keeping countries backward so that they could extract raw materials or whatever from them. It was based on free trade. And the American system was based on a different set of principles, which is that your economy is not measured by money. Your economy is measured by what are you producing? Are you advancing? Is your population getting healthier? Is it getting more productive? Is it getting more prosperous? Does it have more opportunities? And is that a durable policy that is going to continue in the future? Those were the two systems. And by the end of the 19th century, the American system was really the wonder of the world. You had Russia, China, Japan, Germany, France. You had leaders in all of those countries explicitly following the American system. Now, I ask your viewers to think, were you ever taught the American system in school? Of course not. It's been written out. Why? Because the British imperial system recognized it was a threat. One of the things they did is they assassinated our presidents, like Lincoln, like Garfield, like McKinley, by creating an environment, creating anarchists, creating radicals, where you don't necessarily have to, give them the marching orders directly, but you create an environment in which people are out there ready to take out a president. Does that sound familiar? That's the environment that we're in today. But the purpose of it, the reason for it, was to crush the American system from spreading, because the American system is based on Donald Trump's stated policies. I want a world of sovereign nations, working with each other as individual nations, working out their differences, but based on actual economic development. And if you have a world of sovereign nations, then this globalist financier parasite, which is simply a modern day version of the British Empire, is not going to function. And so they have a kind of feral, hatred of American system policies. That's where it comes from. Then once you sort of put yourself in that setting of this fight between the two systems in the world, you discover a whole lot. If you look more carefully at the role of British intelligence, British policy throughout the 20th century, let's just take the crisis in the Mideast. Who created the Muslim Brotherhood? That was a direct operation from British intelligence in the 1920s. And you look at a whole array of different policies, you simply start pulling the string, where you're no longer blacking out this idea that there is a British imperial system still functioning. Once you entertain that hypothesis and you start looking at the world, a lot of things seem to make sense, which is why I think a lot of people respond to our work by saying, oh my gosh, you've put the pieces together for me.
Can you go a little bit deeper on the Muslim Brotherhood being started by the Brits in the 20s?
Well, you even, you can go back even to the 19th century. I mean, if you look at the question of radical and political Islam, you'll find the hand of the British all over it. I mean, one of the more famous figures in this gets into the 20th century, is Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence, who was British intelligence. I can't remember his first name, Kim Philby, the famous, double triple agent spy in Britain. His father was one of the key handlers of these kinds of networks in the Mideast. In an earlier period in the 19th century, the British proconsul of Egypt, I think it was Lord Cromer, he was a Bering from the Bering Bank. He was one of the people who built up political.
So this right here, this is getting a little bit interesting. This was the first time I ever heard anything like this, or these books being mentioned. So this is new information for me. It's not like they kind of go around giving this kind of information out or telling us to read this kind of stuff. I don't, like, this kind of stuff isn't loud in America. So the things that are loud here in America, we take for granted how good we have it. And I think we should wake up and get ready to put our lives on the line for this, because at the end of the day, if you're not ready to die for what you're doing, then you should stop doing it. You should do something different.
Radical Islam, and it was always used as a tool against the nationalist forces in countries like Egypt and elsewhere who were trying to develop independent, economically strong nations, people like Nasser, people like Mubarak, for example. So, I mean, there have been some excellent books written on this. One called The Devil's Game by Robert Dreyfus, and the other one whose name escapes me at the moment, but it's called Secret Agents, where they go in depth into the role of British intelligence in creating radical and political Islam, which then becomes a very convenient tool for them.
Now, how much when you say the Brits, are you saying the royal family? How much is it the bankers? How much is it the wealth? How much is the Rothschild? Who specifically was playing these games? We know the story of what Rothschilds did during war to say, hey, Napoleon is losing the war, and then everybody started selling off the bonds, and they came in, they 10x their fortune overnight. So we know those games they played to create a lot of wealth. This is before there was regulation. But when you say the Brits, who specifically are you saying has the power to do some of these assassination attempts? Is it the money, or is it more politics or royalty?
See, here's the part. He said before there was regulation. Oh, they want to get rich and then regulate it? Oh, wow, that's bull. That's bull snaps. I'm telling you, it's not, bruh. See how sneaky?
It's like a corporation. And everybody plays their part. In my show yesterday, I referenced a new book, which has just conveniently come out, just as King Charles is arriving in Washington, D.C. You referenced it. It's entitled Queen Elizabeth and Her Presidents, The Hidden Hand Behind History. And the author documents, Queen Elizabeth was more thoroughly briefed with daily intelligence briefings, national security briefings. She was on top of the nuclear contingencies. You could bet she had, her hands all over the Five Eyes operation. And this author, I haven't read the book yet. I've just read the blurbs and watched a couple of interviews because I just discovered it 2 days ago. But, I don't know if this author is saying this is a good thing or she's neutral. I don't know the particular political take in terms of this. But she describes how the monarchy uses what they call soft power to influence presidents. But then, yes, you have the City of London. You have the financial power that's embedded in the City of London. And, this is one of the things which I think illuminates what the Iran conflict is all about. Because the City of London, Lloyds of London, the people who set the oil prices with Brent crude, which is set in London and has nothing to do with the delivery of a barrel of oil, it's just speculation. They've used the instability, the choke point of the Strait of Hormuz, to extract what the president's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, calls a terror premium, basically a terror tax.
Yo, what? Yo, bro, we're being men. we need to check these folks. What? Are you kidding me? Like, yo, hold on, wait, but there's more.
Where if you look at the price of a gallon of oil here in the United States, about 20% of that comes from the pricing from the Brent futures market, which is in London, which has nothing to do with the physical production of oil, unlike West Texas pricing, and it has to do with the insurance of Lloyds of London, which basically had a monopoly prior to this. So that's sort of the financial end of the thing. Then you get the intelligence side of things, which is MI6 and MI5, which are pretty legendary, and which I think up until the Trump administration were pretty much joined at the hip with the CIA. And then you have much more of the soft power, which is the media, and the way that they shape the political environment. And
we're getting played like a fiddle. And what's crazy? I really don't like this part, but the NATO, they got together and had a vote that anybody that wants to get out of NATO has to have 2/3 of everybody say that it's okay. Like, what? They just trapped us in NATO too? Oh man, this is nasty.
And one of the things that this British elite have mastered and been masters of for decades is psychological warfare. The way that they shape narratives, the way that they look at the war going on inside MAGA from the people who used to be MAGA, like Tucker Carlson and MTG and others. This is just pure psychological manipulation in order to divert the MAGA movement from the task at hand, which is that everything that this administration is doing strategically and economically is aimed at breaking the power of this modern-day British Empire, or what this administration bluntly says is the globalist system. This is big. The last president who seriously threatened the global reach of this imperial system was William McKinley. Now, if John Kennedy had lived long enough, might that have been a serious threat? Probably. But what the president is doing right now, especially with this cabinet, this team is extraordinary. And I always tell people, turn off your social media feed and just watch the cabinet meetings. Read the executive orders. Read the presidential directives. Pay attention to what they're actually saying and doing. It is historic. And they want you diverted. Is it Israel or is it Qatar? That is not the issue. The issue is these two systems before the world.
Wow. You have to know, if you say that to the average consumer of content on social media today, no one's pointing at the Brits. So if you're saying Tucker and MTG and others, how would the Brits get a hold of them? How would MI6 do that?
All right, guys, this is new information. Anybody that watches PBD podcast, they're aware of this. Anybody that's watching us, we're on top of it just like everybody else. This is what we do. PBD podcast. Go ahead. Make sure you join. Make sure you subscribe. All right, real shit. This guy's legit. I fucks with it, but this is where we're at. We're trying to get to the meat and potatoes. That's why I like this guy. He handles business. If I can get minds like this someday, this is a man. This is what a man is. I fucks with PBD.
Their methods. I mean, that's I don't see any connection there. Well, maybe you're seeing something that we're not.
Well, I think it's more of this question of you create a system,
okay,
which is the system where people get paid, where they get influence, where, they live their lives. You create that, sometimes I compare it to Stockholm syndrome, where, you've lived in this system your whole life. If you buck the system, you're going to lose money. You're going to lose your job. I mean, with Tucker, honestly, I think Tucker was terrified after the assassination of Charlie Kirk. You also play on people's psychological vulnerabilities. So again, it's not like you get a phone call from, the head of MI6 saying, Tucker, this is what you're going to say today. That's not the way it works. You create a system that people have lived in for so long.
I'm actually really curious how it works, because if let's just say the Brits have been doing this the longest, you have to know that automatically others are going to duplicate what they're doing. So, Russia's going to be paying attention, China's going to be paying attention, Qatar's going to be paying attention, everybody else is going to be paying attention at the propaganda game that Brits have played. And the Brits played it against Iran as well, so Irans are paying attention to see what they're doing. So, but what is the playbook? If you were to say the playbook of doing first you do this, then you do this, then you do this, then you do this, what would the method be?
Well, the method is to keep people sort of in the world of perceptions, where all you're doing is just reacting to what, the narrative is, the institutions. I mean, obviously, one of the critical elements in the United States is the mainstream media, completely controlled by the globalists. And again, it doesn't have to be a direct tie to the city of London, although a lot of times if you dig deep enough, you'll find it. But it's to the powerful, what the president has called global financier elite. Well, they run the mainstream media. They run entertainment. Entertainment and culture is a big part of this. Again, because it's once you shape how people think, then you don't have to go in and specifically say, well, then think this, think this, think this. You've got them trapped in a world where all you're looking at is the shadows on the wall. And that's what the media does, that's what the culture does, and so on. They create the shadows on the wall, and all you do is react to the shadows. What we do, and what I'm pretty sure some people in the administration must understand, because they wouldn't be doing the kinds of things they're doing, strategically and economically, is you're looking at what's generating the shadows. And that is this fight between these two systems. You mentioned the Russians. They get it. Read what the Russians say about who's keeping the war with Ukraine going. They're very clear. It's not only the Europeans, it's specifically the British. They are very, very clear that it is the British who are keeping this going. They're no longer saying the United States is the great warmonger. I mean, yeah, you have a few hotheads in Russia who still say that. But the official, Putin, the people who speak for President Putin, they're not pointing the finger at the United States any longer. They're pointing the finger at the British. And in the 19th century, this had a name, and they're still playing it. It was called the Great Game. And the Great Game was to make sure that nations stayed pitted against each other, constantly fighting, so that the imperial game masters at the top could continue to play their games. There you go. The elements of the Great Game, which Rudyard Kipling outlined in Kim. And, Central Asia has been, Afghanistan, Southwest Asia, Central Asia, the Mideast, all of this. You look at the way the British and the French, but primarily the British, rewrote the map after the Ottoman Empire broke up after World War I. It was to keep these, they divided countries up in the craziest ways that made no sense in terms of the different religious or ethnic or political groupings. They shattered it in such a way it would always be a cockpit for war. And that's how they do it. You mentioned Iran. I mean, it's sort of like the classic case. You had a nationalist leader, Mossadegh, who nationalized the oil industry. Well, believe me, the British Empire was not going to tolerate that. So he was overthrown and the Shah was put in. And then at a certain point, the Shah began operating from the standpoint of what is good for Iran. He wanted to use the oil revenues to build nuclear power, to actually develop the country as a modern nation. So he gets overthrown. The British are really quite, Kermit Roosevelt was in on that. And if you actually look at the history, Eisenhower was not exactly happy when he realized what was going on there. Because Eisenhower was somebody who actually had an American outlook, which is why he stopped the British and the French from taking the Suez Canal in 1956. But again, when you sort of just shift the way you look at the world from these binaries, communism versus capitalism, the West versus Islam, right versus left, these binaries are out there to keep you from looking at, again, what's generating the shadows on the wall. And it's this historic fight between imperialism and the idea that nations and people have the right to develop for the betterment of the nation and the people, not for the betterment of some global financier elite.
So you don't look at it right now. That's interesting, because it's globalist versus what we're trying to do, right? So you don't look at it as West versus Islam. You're not looking at it as Qatar as the rest. That's just a distraction to you. How much of this, to simplify to the average person, how much of this comes down to money? How much of it comes down to power? And how much of it is, if you got money, you got the power anyway. So how do you view what they're solving for long term?
Well, I think for long term, it's even more evil. I mean, they use the money, they use the power, but ultimately it comes down to an image of man. I mean, if you go back through history, what do you find with these very evil imperial systems? They really believe that we're no better than animals. They just happen to have bluer blood, so they get to run us. But, they want a world in which people are stupid and backward so that they can control them and they can loot them. And, so they don't want people ultimately educated, independent, sovereign. That's what they don't like. That's why they fear the American system so much. Because while obviously this question of the image of man in the image of the creator, as opposed to, man is simply an animal to be manipulated by his senses, which by the way is the basis of all of British liberal philosophy. John Locke, Thomas Hume, John Stuart Mill, it's all based on the idea that we know the world only through our senses, not our minds. And so they create institutions to keep us trapped in that kind of thing. But that the image of man is man in the image of the creator, obviously that's been around since the time of Christ, and in some respects, actually in very real respects, in earlier religions and movements. But what do you get with the American Revolution? You actually get an economic system based on the idea that the productive powers of a nation is the human mind, is human creativity. That was a breakthrough. That was Hamilton's ideas. And that actually forms the basis of a completely different kind of way of organizing your society, where you're maximizing creativity. You're not maximizing money. So yeah, the empire uses power. They use money. They use ideologies. They use wars. They use all of these things. But it's for the purpose of keeping their system protected from upstart sovereign nations who are likely to challenge them mortally if they get off the ground. And when, again, I go back to the end of the 19th century, where this idea of the American system was consciously understood In many countries, Japan's Meiji Restoration was based on the American system. Count Sergei Witte, the last economic advisor for the last Tsar in Russia, was a student of the American system. There were people in Italy, in France, in Germany who were students of the American system by name. And people just have to ask themselves the question, well, this is what was dominating the 19th century. How come I've never heard of it? Because the British rewrote our history.
Because the British rewrote our history. Okay, so when you're going to the Brits rewriting history, King Charles is going to be coming in town. And when you go and you look at stuff with King Charles, his history is a very unique, history on what things he's done. The
Brits rewrote our history.
It's just nasty. Diana, you got him taking money from Qatar, $3.2 million documents saying that money was given to me when he was a prince to go to a charity, and his affection to Islam and how he's complimentary there. He'll speak on that day, Ramadan, but not on Easter. What role? Because what I'm trying to figure out is who's influencing who? Who's elevating who? Who has control over who? Some will say, the Israel elites are controlling politics in America, and through that they're getting things done elsewhere, right? You'll hear the criticism there. Some will say Qatar right now, you saw the number $6.3 billion they put into U.S. universities, officially more than China. China's at like $5.5 billion. Qatar's number one at $6.3 billion. And then you'll see China, by controlling manufacturing that we learned during COVID, oh my God, we are so reliant on China. They controlled it in a completely different way. We have the strongest military. But who is really, because I have a very, very hard time thinking Britain has the same kind of control and influence like they did before. I have a hard time buying that, but I'm always open to being wrong. So I just want to know, with King Charles and influence, is Qatar and them influencing him, or is it the other way around?
Well, I think it's the other way around. Again, because if you go back and you look at some of this history, Charles in particular was a big supporter of the Saudis, and I would say in their earlier pre-Trump incarnation, where the Saudis were notoriously supporting Muslim extremism, especially the whole Wahhabite side of things. You look at the history of Wahhabism, again, this is another case where you go back to the 19th century or the 20th century. How did the Saudi family end up being the family that was ruling everything? Because that was not a done deal at the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. Straight British intelligence. I mean, again, that's documented by some of the books that I referenced earlier. But what you have today, and that's sort of where you see the Charles question. And yeah, he's been a major supporter of setting up Islamic centers. And again, I'm not doing this from I'm not assessing this from the standpoint of Islam bad, West good. I'm looking at this from the standpoint of what the British created in terms of political radical Islam to use as a tool to keep the world divided. So, think, for example, the fall of the Soviet Union at the beginning of the 1990s. All of a sudden, we no longer have the communist boogeyman from the standpoint of the Soviet Union as the way of dividing the world. Samuel P. Huntington, who's an author who has got extensive ties to British institutions and British intelligence and so on. What does he do? He writes The Clash of Civilizations. All right, now the dividing line in the world is the West versus Islam. Now, what Samuel P. Huntington isn't going to tell you is everything he's attacking in terms of Islam, which is dangerous, is this particularly created political radical Islam, which the British Empire has its hands all over. So that is the game that the British have played. Now, Donald Trump, I think, has judoed a lot. Because unlike the way the British approach, say, the Mideast, the way British intelligence, played a major role in shaping policies in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and again, in terms of the king, I think you have different levels in terms of competence of monarchs. I think Queen Elizabeth was extremely competent, extremely intelligent. I'm not sure how far down Charles falls on that rating system, but I don't think he's quite at the level of his mother. But that doesn't mean, he doesn't have his hands in a lot of things. But that's sort of been the role, the relationship between the British and these particular movements and tendencies in the Mideast. But along comes Donald Trump. And remember what? His first administration, where he really didn't have control of a lot, which I think he discovered pretty quickly. But in his first administration, what was his first foreign visit? It was to Saudi Arabia. That was highly unusual, and other Gulf states. But he basically laid down the law to the Saudis. And he said, you're going to stop your support for Islamic fundamentalism, for ISIS, for Al-Qaeda, and so on. And they did. And he basically said, we're going to have a different relationship. You don't have to now only be a pawn of these imperial forces, which you've largely been. Now you can start to develop as a sovereign nation. And we're going to work with you from that standpoint. And then that was the basis on which he could then move on to the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia hasn't signed them yet. They were on the verge of before October 7th. But where he started with other Gulf states, other nations, and say, you're no longer pieces on the imperial chessboard. You're a sovereign nation. I'm going to treat you that way. Let's work out trade deals which mutually benefit us, not where you're just a gas station for, British Petroleum or Royal Dutch Shell. We're going to work out nation-to-nation economic deals which are going to help your nations. And nations started to buy into that. Then he wasn't able to finish it with his first term, came back with his second term. And again, all the reports are, Saudi Arabia was very close to joining the Abraham Accords, which means you recognize Israel. And then October 7th happened, and everything we see play out since then. But look at the response of the Gulf nations to the Iran conflict. They're not on Iran's side any longer. Whether they wanted to be or whether they felt they had no choice, because of this crazy, Mullah-run, IRGC-run regime. Now they say, all right, there's a different world we can have something to do with. And essentially they're lining up with the United States against the insanity in Iran and creating a completely different environment. So, again, when you look at what the president and his team have done from the standpoint of stopping the great game, stopping this imperial manipulation, which especially in the Mideast has given us perpetual wars, and saying, no, we're not going to do that any longer. And, it takes time. You have to take pieces off the chessboard to stop this. But I think that's what this administration is doing. And it's completely contrary to the policy of the British, which is why the British and the rest of the European Union didn't support what the president is doing in Iran.
But don't you think Britain's gotten weaker and weaker and weaker? Don't you think when you see their influence, their wealth, the immigration that they've opened up, the crime, they no longer are seen by the world the way they did maybe 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago?
Yeah, you can take that back 100 years, because that was the whole point of the pivot. When the British recognized that they were no longer a match for the United States. Coming out of the Civil War, we weren't destroyed. People should look at the hand of the British in terms of the Confederacy, the reintroduction of the slave system and all of that. We weren't destroyed after the Civil War. Lincoln, despite his assassination in 1865, had set into motion the revival of the American system of political economy. By the time we had the 1876 Centennial Exhibition, we were the wonder of the world in terms of what we were doing with industry and so on. So what did they do? They started assassinating our presidents, and then they started corrupting our institutions. So by the time of the turn of the 20th century, you had the British explicitly outlining people like Cecil Rhodes and the Rhodes Scholarship or the British Roundtable, explicitly saying we have to bring the United States back under our way of doing things. So that for almost all of the 20th century, not all of it, but for a large part of the 20th century, we were the dumb giant to their policy. So they don't have to be strong. They don't have to have a strong military. In fact, the House of Lords just published an extremely important report where they review the U.S.-British relationship, and they also premiered it at Chatham House, which is their primary think tank. And a number of the Lords were very, very clear that we have benefited by this system that we set up, but this system only exists because the United States enforced it. They say that. Yeah, that's the report, or that's the Chatham House forum, which was just last week. But throughout, they admit we couldn't enforce this system without the United States basically doing it for us. So they don't have to be strong. They just needed us going along. And especially with President Trump's second term, they ain't getting it. We're not going along. So they sent King Charles over for his charm offensive, which I don't think means much.
What do you think happened? Because the first term, the president seemed like he was trying to do things, but it wasn't fully creating momentum. What do you think happened on the break that he had for 4 years when Biden came in? I wonder what adjustments you think he made to his approach, because he was determined to get back in there, because everybody was asking him, are you going to run again? He said, yes. He says, I've never had a more exciting job than this one. I have to get back in there. He really wanted to get back to become the president again. It wasn't like he was contemplating not doing it. His words. What changed with him? What adjustments do you think he made? Did he go from thinking who was the enemy in 2016 to realizing that's not really the enemy, this is the enemy? Because on the second term that he's had, his sequencing has been very interesting. He first gets Panama Canal.
The way this sounds, it sounds like Trump is getting ready for the next Super Bowl. You know what I'm saying? And he had to play these little games and win here and win there and win there. And then when the championship came, it was just like, go, baby, go. Hail Mary. Ha ha. You know what I'm saying? Hey.
No, he first gets Venezuela. Then he goes and finds a way for Panama's president to turn against China to say CK cannot have this control of these two ports. And then he goes and attacks Iran. And then what changed? What do you think changed? Did he figure out something? Do you think he realized who the enemy was on the second term versus the first term?
I think he always had a kind of general idea. I mean, I'm not going to venture too far in terms of what he knows and what he doesn't know, because I don't know what he knows and what he doesn't know. What I'd see is the effects of what he does. And I think one of the things that happened in the first term is, he was just hit across the face with how evil and how deep these institutional forces were. How much does he understand their origin? I have absolutely no idea. But I look at the way that, as you say, this second term has been completely different. And I think, once he recognized what COVID was, once he saw what happened on J6, he saw the steal, and then of course you get the assassination attempt in Butler. But I think, he got a much deeper understanding of how evil what it is he was up against. How much, again, the history is there. I can't believe that somewhere in this administration, you don't have some very deep institutional knowledge of what you're up against, because you don't make the changes that this administration is making by accident, randomly.
I agree.
You don't revive the American system randomly. And I should reference the fact that Jameson Greer, the trade ambassador, when he went to Davos, he gave an amazing speech. His speech was entitled The American System That Nobody Knows About. And he literally went through Alexander Hamilton and how the American system had been the economic philosophy which guided this country in the 19th century and made it great. So there are people who know this kind of hidden history, which we're all supposed to forget about. So we all just sit there and react to the shadows on the wall. So, who has the deeper institutional historical knowledge? I don't know. But somehow this combination of people is really extraordinary. Especially when you have J.D. Vance, Scott Bessent. I've been following administration since 1976. I've never seen anything like this.
What do you mean by that?
In terms of competence, coherence, singularity of purpose. One of the things you probably noticed, there's no leaks. This is not a government which is where some faction is trying to, get factitious advantage by leaking this, that, and the other thing.
You had a little bit of that with Michael Waltz, and you had a little bit with Joe Kent, and you had some of those.
And guess how long they lasted.
That's true. That's
right. This is a different animal. This is on point. They have a mission. They certainly understand that the enemy is globalism. They say that. They said that. They went to Davos. They said it. Jameson Greer said the policy is the American system. So, it's there. And then you have people like Scott Bessent who know from the inside how this British financier system works. I mean, he did work with George Soros. He did crash the British pound. So, he's got some skills.
He's got some skills.
Those skills are being used for us now for a change.
That makes sense. And by the way, if there's a guy that knows how to mess with the currency very well, it's George Soros. So to be with him, I think he worked with him once for 9 years, second time for 5 years as his chief investment officer, I don't know what it was, but he was a heavyweight with Soros. So he has that experience. But to finish up with UK, when you see this chart here, this is from a paper that came from the Institute of Economic Affairs. When you look at this, it says what Americans perceive for UK to be in ranking of how wealthy UK is versus US for GDP per capita. And they said Americans believe UK would be right behind Jersey. Okay, meaning New York first, California second, Washington third, Massachusetts, Texas, Jersey, then UK. Then you have everybody else. Which actual ranking, UK would be 51st. This whole thing with Vitamin and PBD podcast started with a phone, me and Mario. That's it. And it grew today to 15 million subscribers almost and 164 full-time employees. And that relationship where you watching us and supporting us wouldn't happen without you. But did you know 51% of you that watch the content are not subscribed to the channel? And it would mean the world to us if you could press that subscribe button and notification. Why? It allows us to grow, hire more, do bigger interviews, have a big.
So with this is a little break right here, so we'll go ahead and take the break. If you didn't follow, go ahead and follow. If you didn't subscribe, go ahead and subscribe. PBD and here, we're gonna bring you that real stuff. But a lot of the information she's giving us right now is information that is not it's not widely known. I didn't know any of this when I first heard it. And a lot of people probably didn't hear this before. So this is all good stuff, and everybody should take their life a little more seriously. We need to come together, and we need to figure out how to make this happen. All right, we have each other, we got each other's backs, and we can just go ahead and figure this out together. All right, guys.
Your team and deliver a better product to you. So if you haven't yet, if you don't mind, press that subscribe button. It would mean the world to us. So how much of their control that they have, the actual control and the actual wealth that they have, is falling apart, where America's just, because you said something, you call them the dumb giant, right? The UK sees America as the dumb giant. Is this dumb giant becoming so giant that you can no longer control it?
Yeah, well, it's also becoming way less dumb. I mean, that's the point. When you rediscover the American system and the power that actually gives you to be economically sovereign, look at the question of energy. Well, what is one of the premier policies of President Trump? Energy independence, which means you're no longer at the mercy of the Strait of Hormuz. Unfortunately, we're still at the mercy of Brent futures pricing, but I think that may recalibrate at some point in the not too far distant future. But you create independence in energy, so you're not reliant on their markets or their strategic choke points or their Lloyd's of London insurance cut off and so on. And everything this administration has done, a lot of it quiet. Where you look at something seemingly boring, like the recent executive orders that the president promulgated on April 20th, where he invoked the Defense Production Act for a whole gamut of aspects of our energy sector, not just energy production, but generation and transmission, where we're incredibly vulnerable. We don't build transformers in the United States. And if we had to order one from South Korea, it'd take 2 years. So let's say you had a bunch of transformer accidents, the lights go out for years. And the president said, no, this doesn't work. And in his order, he says the market is not seen to our national defense. So we have to step in. And there's all sorts of government financing institutions under the Defense Production Act. In the Energy Department, you have things like the Export-Import Bank. I think there's one called the International Development Finance Corporation. But these government corporations, where this administration is saying, hey, Wall Street has not, and the magic of the free market, has not seen to our basic needs. We are vulnerable in all these areas. You mentioned it, during COVID, we discovered this. Well, we have to use the full array of government power to make sure that we're producing the basic things we need as a sovereign nation. One of those things is tariffs. But another of those things is how do you actually get credit into these sectors? If JP Morgan Chase would rather speculate than invest in some vital industrial area, how are you going to get the money in there? Well, you use these government financing agencies to make sure that the credit goes to people who want to produce here in the United States. J.D. Vance described it in terms of our strategic minerals weaknesses. He said, look, companies would come in and want to invest in a processing facility here in the United States, and they go through the onerous regulatory policies, and they put a lot of money into this, and they're just about ready to get going, and China would come in and undercut the price and wipe them out, and they go bankrupt. So we didn't have anything in the United States. He said, that's crazy. He said, so we're going to create new kinds of mechanisms where the producers are protected and they can produce. So what I mean by we're not dumb any longer, dumb is blindly following the British free trade system, blindly believing in some mystical invisible hand is going to make it all work out. No, the invisible hand is picking your pocket to feed the city of London. And Donald Trump isn't playing that game any longer. And that's the problem that the British have right now.
And how much of that did we see when we all of a sudden saw Lloyd's of London pulling out? Was that a mistake on their end?
I think it was a mistake on their end. I don't think they expected this administration to do what it did, which is to step in and say, okay, you're not going to do it, we will. So we essentially just broke a 300-year monopoly on shipping insurance by them pulling out. Because, of course, that's the first time they had ever canceled insurance through all the other conflicts, in the last 30, 40, 50 years. If you have a conflict in the region, they jack the prices up. That was their business model. They did quite well from that. They never canceled. And the fact that they canceled was their way of saying, we do not agree with Donald Trump trying to end this game. So we're going to call his bluff. We're going to cancel. And Trump counter-bluffed and said, go ahead, make my day.
How important was that? The average person didn't pay attention too much to that when that happened. In the power structure, how important was that move? And what do you think behind closed doors? UK sitting there saying, wait a minute, what did he say? He said he's going to insure? Yes. Oh, shit. What do you think their reaction was to his move?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. They did not expect a president to do any of these kinds of things, which is why they've been so flat-footed in terms of all of their responses right now. And it's out in the open. I mean, suddenly the country which was our oldest and dearest ally, which I always found completely hysterical, people would literally say, Britain is our oldest and dearest ally. And I say, excuse me, do you remember the American Revolution? Do you remember the War of 1812? They're not our oldest ally, right? But people were sort of in this, this fairy tale and, the soap opera of the royal family and all the rest of that. And I think this experience where in essence, the British are outing themselves by responding to a president who will openly not play their game. So
who came from UK to the White House and gave an invitation to the president we've never had before. And his reaction was very complimentary. I don't know if you remember this or not. This was about a year ago, maybe 14 months ago. He got an invitation to do something that never in the history of America has that happened. Do you remember that?
Yeah, sort of about as much as you do in terms of, I don't remember the specifics.
Yeah, but it seemed like it was a big deal to the president. It seemed like the president was very honored by it, and he was very, taken by it. It's not too many times you see him going through it where you kind of see, oh, this is interesting. This has never happened before. But at the same time, I know the vibe he gives me is he doesn't want to be the man where anybody thinks they can control him. He'll deal with everybody. He'll do a team of rivals. And a lot of people will say, well, he's owned by this, he's owned by that. They control him. They tell him what to do, and he does it. I don't know if I fully buy into the fact that he's controlled by anybody. I think he's his own man making the decisions. I mean, one of the things that he did that I want to get your thoughts on, where they withdrew from 66 international, organizations. 31 was UN entities, 35 was non-UN. One of them being the World Health Organization, the other being the UN Human Rights Council, the Paris Climate Agreement. He did that in 2016, 2018, and then Biden went back and then he redid it again. How important is it for him when he comes out and says, look, we're withdrawn from all these organizations that you guys claim are important to us? Do you think he does that to kind of make NATO or some of these guys realize, well, what happens if he all of a sudden withdraws? Because the way they handled the war with Iran, they almost made it seem like they didn't care if he withdraws or not. The way they handled it, no, we're not going to let you do this. Spain, no, we're not going to let you fly over. No, you can't use our military bases. Okay, no problem. This is how far you want to go. Here's what I'm capable of doing as well. Do you think it'll ever get to a point that he withdraws from NATO?
I think there's a good chance of it. I think all of these European countries right now are definitely punching above their weight class. I mean, what do they have to bring to the table? They bought into the green nonsense. They destroyed their ability to produce energy for their populations. Most of them don't have serious militaries. They're dependent on, they left themselves dependent on oil from the Strait of Hormuz. So I think he's called a lot of people's bluffs, and I think he's ready to call NATO's bluffs. But see, this is the way the president operates. People should read The Art of the Deal. It's much better to get your opponent to expose himself than for you to stand there and say this, that, and the other thing. So, take the question of NATO, or take the role of, the British in terms of the bases and so on. Donald Trump could have, said, I don't like NATO, I don't like these people, and one of these days I'm going to break with them. Instead, he pursues a policy which is the American policy, which is what he believes is in the interest of the country. And by doing so, in a way that these institutions have not seen, the last person I think who seriously challenged them strategically was Eisenhower in the Suez Crisis, and before that it was Roosevelt. That's another story. But here he is seriously challenging them, and he's forcing them to expose themselves. So he doesn't have to go out and give some kind of, expert briefing to the American people about why NATO is a problem. NATO just proved that they're a problem. He doesn't have to go out and give some expert briefing about why Britain is not, we should no longer have a special relationship with Britain. Britain just proved it by refusing to step forward. So he's forcing these institutions, and I would call them adversarial institutions, to increasingly show their true color. Whereas previously, presidents, Congress, other nations, political leaders, they all play by the rules of these games. The post-war rules-based order is the favorite phrase of a lot of people like Mark Carney, who's still trying to save it. But if everybody plays by the rules of the game, nobody sees those rules. It's only when somebody says, no, I'm not playing by the rules of that game, that the people trying to enforce the game end up exposing themselves. And I think that's what's happened, especially with NATO, with Iran, and the response of Europe to all of this.
Let's talk about the blockade, because this kind of bleeds into that, right? With the whole NATO saying we don't want to fight this war, this is your war, this is Israel's war, we want to have nothing to do with it. With the way he set up the blockade, and Iran being stuck, they can only sit on the oil for so long before they start, being losing money. And we've seen the number, $400 to $500 million a day they're losing, $12 to $15 billion a month they're losing. How sustainable that is. And the Abbas Araghchi, who is the main negotiator right now on their end, he didn't want to meet with US, he didn't want to meet with Witkoff, Kushner, and JD. So then he went to Islamabad, he had a meeting there, then he went to Oman, then he went to Russia to have a meeting, I believe, with Putin and his leaders. What is your impression of what's going to happen with Iran and how that ends?
Well, I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis in terms of, predictions, because there's a lot of different moving pieces. And obviously you do not have a unified government in Iran. You've got the IRGC, you've got the civilian government, you got a whole, who knows how much is going on in terms of Israeli intelligence, how much is going on in terms of British intelligence and so on. So there's a lot of moving pieces in terms of this. But, I think what characterizes Donald Trump in a very unique way, which is where you can hypothesize an outcome to this, is he operates in the real world of physical economy. And you hit the nail on the head. The fact that you've got this blockaded, the fact that once the storage facilities in Iran are filled, and, I think Scott Bessent said May 2nd is the point that hits, which we're getting pretty close to, maybe it was a little bit after that. And then they have to stop pumping. And once you stop pumping, you lose the wells, right? It just doesn't work any longer. If you stop pumping, you're going to have to start from scratch and drill all over again. The president does have them over a barrel. He's not just operating in the world of moving diplomatic chess pieces around. He's dealing in a world of physical reality where I think he's got him by the throat. And they're going to play it I think they're going to play it till the very last minute. And I think if the relatively sane people in Iran can make the decisions, and that's where I think you have a wild card, yet I don't know the answer to that, but if they can make the decisions to finally, negotiate the fundamental questions in time, they are just up against it. I mean, their economy will, if they lose those oil wells, and, that will set them back to the dark ages much more, in a certain sense, than bombing bridges and, electric energy plants, which clearly the president doesn't want to do. He will, if he has to. But clearly he doesn't want to send the Iranian people back to the Stone Age, but he is not going to let this cancer exist any longer. But I think this, the way that they're doing this in terms of dealing in the world of physical reality as opposed to diplomatic machinations and money machinations and so on, this gives the president, and when he says I've got all the cards, that's what I think he's talking about.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Now, who do you think could bail out Iran? Who could help them out? Who could give them extend their life of saying, hey, we'll be a customer of yours. Let's do a deal this way. Can Russia or China or anybody else help them out?
Well, I think Trump wants to help them out. I mean, from the standpoint of the people of the nation.
I'm not talking about IRGC. Okay. I'm specifically saying IRGC. Yeah. Who can help out the IRGC?
Who can help out the IRGC? I don't really believe that either Russia or China is all that enamored of this regime. And when I'm talking about any nation, I'm not also presuming that they're completely unified. I think there's a lot more factions in China than there probably are in Russia at this point, at least in terms of their actual influence. So are there factions in China that would like to bail out the IRGC? Probably. Is Xi Jinping going to let them? I don't know the answer to that, but if I had to guess, I'd say probably not. So I don't think they have too many places to go at this point. Because, again, what has Donald Trump done with these other countries? What has he done with Russia? What has he done with China? He's created a different kind of relationship with them. If you read the National Security Strategy, which came out in December, or read the National Defense Strategy, which came out in January, these are very, very interesting documents because they're written for the layman. They're not written in bureaucratese, and they're relatively short. And they just establish a completely different parameter in the world where you do not see either Russia, especially you don't see Russia, treated as some kind of immutable enemy. And you see China treated as a competitor who could cause problems in Asia, but we're going to be powerful enough that it won't. So, and believe me, the Chinese and the Russians have read those documents. You compare the U.S. National Security Strategy document to the new British defense document, their hair is on fire in terms of Russia, perpetual enemy, World War III around the corner, and so on and so forth. China, they have a more complicated approach to, which is how can we somehow still maneuver China in our world and use it against the United States? But the Russians and Chinese can read these documents. And I think they understand, at least the people calling the shots right now, certainly in Russia and, and with Xi Jinping in China, they see the United States as something very different than they've had to deal with for decades and decades. And, in that world, do they still need to play assets like the IRGC to maintain their position on the chessboard and so on? I tend to think not.
Really? So then when it comes down to China, I guess maybe the other thing for us to be thinking about with China is we saw the reports that came in, I think it's 4 or 5 consecutive years of a declining population, 4 years, I believe. It's declining population. It looks like they're going to have their 5th year here in 2026. And they're at 1.01, their birth rate, and the replacement number is 2.1, so they're at 1.01. And what are things that China is going through that they've been very good at hiding that they're internally having to overcome? Because from the outset, it's like China's going to take over, China's going to be the powerful, China's going to be this, China's going to be that. I don't know where you subscribe to that mindset as well. And if not, what challenges are they having that the world is not seeing because they're keeping it private?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, they're not replacing their population, and they've got a very stratified society, and you have a whole lower level of society which is not really participating in, the kind of development and economic growth.
Oh, we'll get to China. We'll do that tomorrow, probably.
That you're seeing in terms of the way they play. They played the free trade system, right? And as President Trump has said, I don't blame them, but honestly, they didn't set up the free trade system. They just played it, but they created a very stratified society. The social credit system, is clearly, I think that's one of the big aspects of it. The social credit system has to be a damper in terms of the ability of your society to actually develop, because you're basically exerting a certain level of mind policing. And once you have mind policing, people are not going to think independently. They're not going to think creatively. So the durable basis for a future society, which is population replacement, and a population, a generalized population, which can create and produce and participate. I think they've left themselves incredibly vulnerable because they just sort of plugged into this world free trade system and milked it for what it was in the context of the way they were running their society. It's not unlike the problem that the Soviet Union faced back in the before the end of the Soviet Union. They had a very highly skilled sector which built and supported their military, but it was totally closed off from the rest of society. And the rest of their civilian economy was just a complete disaster. And it was kind of that tension, that collapse of the civilian economy, because the population, again, was in this kind of, mind policing world where you're not allowed to think independently. And if you do, you're going to be punished. Ultimately, that's what's going to kill any society. Now, once with the fall of the Soviet Union and with Putin's several presidencies, but especially this latest round, they put enormous impact on education, science and technology, cultural expansion, and so on for the whole population. And that's what's key. You can't have a stratified society and be successful. That's the ultimate failure of empires or any system, which is based on that kind of idea that we have the elites and then we have the peons.
It's funny, I had a guy on a podcast a couple weeks ago, Jiang, and he's made some interesting claims that in July 2024, he says President Trump's going to win, he's going to go to war with Iran, and he's going to lose. And he made those comments, those videos went viral. I don't know if you saw that or not. And we had a good conversation together. But when I asked him about China, he said in China, there are certain things you just can't talk about. You just have to accept it. Like, no, we don't even debate it. We don't have, you can't push back on the following ideas that they have. If you do, they'll come knocking on your door. And it's just an accepted thing that they have. So you're right, because what that prevents man from doing, if I can't question, then I lose the creativity of questioning. And then what happens? Nope, just follow the rules. Mom, what do I do with this? Nothing. Just listen to what the government says and move on. But I don't agree with them, honey. Be quiet. They know what they're talking about. It's not sustainable for creative minds. Creative minds will get in trouble, like Jack Ma got in trouble and other people got in trouble. But long term, I don't know if we're really going to see the consequence of what China is doing today for 50 years. I don't know if I'm going to be around to see what happens to China, because the case study you need not just a decade. You're definitely lies. A decade is maybe a little bit, but you kind of need a few decades to see what's going to happen to those guys. By 2076, who are going to be the players? Who's going to be a big empire today that's going to fall? We don't know. What things are going to happen. But what key factors do you think will determine which empires are still in power 50 years from now, not 10 years from now?
Well, the question is, will there be any empires? And that's up to us here in the United States. If the Trump revolution succeeds and continues, which means one of his successors, J.D. Vance, Marco Rubio, continues this, and we establish these principles, which are ensconced in the national security strategy, the national defense strategy, and everything, what all the Trump people said when they went to Davos. We want a world of sovereign nations. If the United States is able to play that role, which is what the British have been afraid of since certainly the time of Abraham Lincoln, but absolutely since the time of McKinley. If the United States maintains itself as a sovereign, independent, prosperous nation, if other nations are allowed to replicate that, and you have, as the president said so many times, a world of sovereign nations, then there won't be any empires. And I think China will adopt to that. Look, there's an older tradition in China. I mentioned the countries that were advocates of the American system. Chiang Kai-shek was an open advocate of the American system. He wrote about the American system of Alexander Hamilton and Henry Carey and others. That tradition is still there somewhere in China. I mentioned Count Sergeyevich in Russia. So, you had the Soviet Union, you had communist China. Soviet Union is gone. Russia is going back much more to its tradition of as a sovereign nation based on Christian principles. China isn't necessarily Christian, but there's a lot in Confucian principles, which cherish the kinds of things you're talking about in terms of creativity. So what I would envision, and again, it's entirely up to what happens here in the United States, that if the Trump revolution sustains itself and continues, in 50 years, there won't be any empires. And in fact, we'll have sovereign nations, and who knows, we may have sovereign colonies on the moon and Mars.
Well, I mean, listen, that is very ideal if you believe that. And so it'd be good to see that happen. By the way, walk me through the influence that Lyndon LaRoche has had on you. Very interesting character. No matter how much I read about him, this guy's a very unique character. He went from, when I see him politically, he was a socialist worker for the Trotskyists in the 40s and 50s, far left. And we know what happened to Trotskyists. They got kicked out of Russia. They were so communist they got kicked out that I think the guy ended up getting killed or died in Mexico. I don't know what it was, but something like that. Yeah, he was assassinated. And then he ends up joining the labor committees the National Caucus of Labor Committees in 69, founded the U.S. Labor Party in 73, and then shifted to far-right politics in the mid-70s. He got himself a little bit of in trouble with mail fraud and tax evasion, the $30 million, whatever it was, that he ended up having to do 15 years. I think he only did 5 years, married a girl 27 years younger than him. He ran for president many times. Interesting guy. Why did he inspire you? What about him interests you?
What interests me is I ran into his movement a couple of years after the Bobby Kennedy assassination, which had obviously affected me pretty dramatically and was sort of spiraling into hopelessness in terms of what are we going to do to turn this country back around again? And I ran into somebody espousing his ideas. And the one thing with him which has never changed, and these descriptions of him are kind of, again, like the shadows on the wall where you take a noun or an adjective and you act like that's what he was. He was a universal genius. And his passion was always this divergence between the development of the physical economy based on the creativity of the human mind versus all these other kind of artificial systems based on money or systems analysis or whatever. And what attracted me to him is that he was an intellectual who forced you to constantly hypothesize and rethink the way you thought. And we did rethink the organization which I joined, which he founded, rethought everything when we discovered the American system. And nothing had changed from the standpoint of our fundamentals. We were trying to find what is the policies, what are the institutions, what is the philosophy that exists in the world that will do what we wanted to do. And when literally we had to rediscover the American system, and it was actually right around the time of the American bicentennial in 1976, that then everything kind of locked in, and we could take the same principles that we had always espoused, but we're trying to figure out, well, socialism worked, does this work, does that, what works? We said, oh, here it is. The American system has always worked. So, the media will then say, oh, he went from left to right. He didn't change. His principles and his policies always stayed the same. And, his influence is not always understood. He played a vital role in Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative. He met Reagan on the campaign trail in 1980. They talked about this, and LaRouche was brought into the Reagan administration for intensive discussions on what Reagan ultimately announced as the Strategic Defense Initiative. I was there in Washington. And at that point, this same imperial elite, which went after Donald Trump, said, okay, LaRouche is getting too big for his britches. Among the people who prosecuted Lyndon LaRouche were Robert Mueller. So, it's a small world.
Wow. What year?
We got to 87.
Wow.
I think the Mueller indictment was either 86 or 87. Maybe it became a blur because it was just like Trump. There were so many indictments at the state and the federal level. Now, one thing I have to say, which I would want to say anyway, following LaRouche's passing, his widow, Helga Zepp LaRouche, took the organization in a direction which we completely disagreed with. And so those of us who formed Promethean Action split off, and we have nothing to do with her, which we need to say legally. But as I said, I would want to do anyway.
Very interesting. Yeah, because when I see some of this stuff, like people like this are very interesting to study because you want to know why they say what they say. Some of the claims he made, he said Queen Elizabeth II runs the international narcotics trade. Okay, he claimed Hitler's rise was orchestrated by Rothschilds, Warburgs, and Oppenheimers, which we know Warburgs were very powerful on what they did. They were even involved with Jekyll Island, the meeting at Jekyll Island, the beginning of building Federal Reserve. Then he said British rules Israel as a zombie nation. Okay, British intelligence and the Queen Circle control the U.S. economy. Queen Elizabeth II framed Bill Clinton. British intelligence orchestrated the Russiagate. The CIA, KGB, and British intelligence conspired to assassinate Lyndon LaRouche. The IMF deliberately created and spread AIDS. The CIA and KGB brainwashed and kidnapped LaRouche AIDS into assassins. I mean, when you go, and I can go on and on and on. This guy had some very unique takes, on what happened. So, did you ever spend time with him one-on-one? Were you around him? And what was these are things he literally believed in on what happened?
Well, those are kind of cartoonish type characterizations of some of the things. But take for example the question of the international drug trade. The key element, and this is something that Bessent and the Trump administration are taking on. The key element of the international narcotics trade, is not the cigar boats with the drugs on them. It's who launders the drug money. And there, all you have to do is go back to the 1960s when the British, the City of London in particular, set up the entire offshore banking operation in the Cayman Islands, Isle of Man, Isle of Wight, and so on, where you have these black boxes of complete and total secrecy in terms of moving money. This is where the financial flows which finance international drug trafficking come from. You also have very premier institutions like Hong Kong, Shanghai. In the 1970s, we wrote a book entitled Dope Incorporated. And some of the research we used came from I think she was the bank commissioner of New York, who had filed a brief against Hong Kong, Shanghai being able to charter itself in New York because of their role in international drug money laundering. So all we did is we just started to put all the pieces together. Now, this was then caricatured. I think there was even a Saturday Night Live skit, which shows somebody playing the Queen of England with nickel bags, handing them off to Henry Kissinger, who, by the way, at one point gave a speech at Chatham House where he said, when I was Secretary of State, I kept the British Foreign Office more closely informed than I did the State Department. So, confessions, essentially. But when you look at the institutions in terms of drug money laundering, in fact, it was about 10 years ago, I think it was the fellow who was the anti-drug czar for Russia, I think his name was Costa, gave a speech at the United Nations where he pretty much said everything we had said in Dope Inc. That it's these big London-based banks that finance international drug trafficking. So, again, the media will put a kind of cartoon version of this. But, or you look at Hitler. Look at the role of his finance minister, Hjalmar Schacht, who came straight out of London Wall Street networks, who was deployed back to Germany to basically set up a financial structure in Germany to keep paying the war reparations debt, and then later to have the money to militarize Germany and so on. He came straight out of these Anglo-American financial circles. So, when you bother to look at you just get below the surface level of history, which is what you did if you look at Wikipedia, usually. And again, just dive a little bit more deeply. You'll find that all of the claims which LaRouche made could be thoroughly historically proven, not in a two-sentence, simple-minded version, but if you actually look at the historical processes behind this. And up until recently, there's really been very little serious history that people have done. It's all been this, this really simple-minded soap opera cartoon version of history. One historian who I think has done extremely important work, and I always take the opportunity to highlight, is a book by Richard Poe entitled How the British Created Communism and Blamed It on the Jews. Now, that is an amazing book.
How the British created communism and blamed it on the Jews?
How
did they do it? What does he say?
What he shows is that communism was created in London. I mean, actually, Karl Marx was on the payroll of the there's the book. Wow. Through Urquhart was basically on the payroll of the British East India Company. They wanted to create an ideology which they could use largely against Russia. I mean, what he documents in the book is that so much of British policy, British policy was largely aimed in the 19th and the early 20th century against their great rival on the continent, which was Russia, and whatever they could do to weaken Russia. And then, of course, they were worried about what was going on with the United States. But what he documents is how these movements were completely synthetically created, and they were all created for geopolitical purposes. And that the claim that it was the Jews was also straight from British intelligence. This is a short book, actually, 20% of it is the footnotes. That's how well documented it is. It's an easy read. He's an excellent writer. And I think people will just find their entire worldview begin to shift when you work through something like this.
So Richard Poe is alive. So he's because it just came out 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Can you go on Richard Poe's link just to see what is his background?
I don't quite remember. It might be an investigative journalist.
New York Times bestselling author and award-winning journalist. He has written bestsellings on many subjects, fiction, shadow. Interesting. All right. Interesting.
Yeah. No, he's just a really competent historian, and there have been so few of those out there who actually just do the work. As opposed to taking a bunch of secondary sources and pasting them together. I mean, that's the other thing I will say in terms of my time with Lyndon LaRouche, which is it was all primary sources. You don't read somebody's description of what something was doing. You went back, read the primary sources. And I would say that the same thing is true of the Trump administration today. Stop getting your ideas about what Donald Trump is doing from social media, unless you're reading Trump himself. Go to the White House website, read the executive orders, read the findings. One of my favorite pastimes is watching a cabinet meeting. These cabinet meetings are amazing because you actually see a team, and they're not rivals, a team of people, who are working with each other in sync to carry out an actual revolutionary policy. It's actually all there. You just have to look for it as opposed to taking Fox News's or the Washington Post's version of, what is going on. Just go to the primary sources yourself and start thinking.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't do that, we have congressmen and congresswomen who think there's been 11 wars. I don't know if you saw that yesterday with Ilhan Omar talking about World War 11, and because she thought that when they put the 2, she thought it meant 11. And right. she was reading off a paper and she said World War 11, and she was destroyed for it. I'm sure it was an innocent mistake, but she was destroyed over it. But that's a good point. By the way, last thing with LaRoche, who would be a modern day Lyndon LaRoche today? Do we have one? Because he ran for president, I think 6, 7, or 8 times. I don't know what the number is. He kept running, and the highest he ever got was 2% as a Democrat in the mid 80s, an 84, something like that.
Right. I mean, we were probably starting to get some traction when all the attacks began against us. But I don't know if Donald Trump will appreciate this or not. But I say that before there was Trump, there was LaRoche. And what happened with Donald Trump is he picked up the same fight, probably not with the same historical or philosophical depth, because LaRoche was really a genius in terms of economics, in terms of science, in terms of philosophy. He was just conversant in everything. I mean, if you listen to one of his discussions, he's talking about philosophical fights which nobody has heard about, but which nonetheless were really foundational to the development of civilization. Does Trump have that kind of depth? I don't know. Again, but it's essentially the same instinct. And with Trump, what did you have? With Trump, you have somebody who had the money to do this. Yeah. Could Trump have become president in 2016 if he were a billionaire? No. And also a new social media platform which didn't exist when LaRoche was running. I mean, our we got material out by leaflets, by pamphlets, and so on. Which had a certain effect. And at certain local levels, before we came under the kind of attack again that you've seen with Trump and all the attacks against him, we were beginning to win primary elections in local and state races and so on. We were beginning to build up a certain kind of traction. But they hit us with a ton of bricks and figured they would wipe us out. They didn't wipe us out. They basically severely damaged us. But basically, we could hang on as an institution to keep these ideas alive. And LaRoche didn't live long enough to see Trump get elected. And he saw that as an extension of the kind of fight that he had fought. Because the key is, if you don't have a leader with that kind of courage to stand up and fight, you're never going to get to these deeper levels. It's only because Trump has stood his ground and fought. And it's forced the enemy much more into the open than they ever have been. Not one assassination attempt, but 3 very visible ones and a few others that, didn't quite get to the level of the 3 that we're talking about. But I think LaRoche's approach was always, we need many Donald Trumps or Lyndon LaRoches. That is, you need people who will think, who will challenge, and will then have the courage to act on their convictions. And that gets back to what we've talked about in terms of creativity and independence. That's the core of a republic. If you don't have people who have the courage of their convictions, and that's one of the horrible things about DEI, and DEI and all this social enforcement is really no different than social credit in Britain. That will cripple your society. Your average healthy society should have a whole bunch of people who are like Donald Trump. They may not express themselves in the same way as Donald Trump, but people who have the courage of their convictions and who think. That's when a republic is secure.
Did LaRoche and the president ever meet? Was there ever a documented meeting between the two?
No, I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Because the president will listen to anybody and everybody, and he always what is the ideas he has? What is she saying? He's not one that wouldn't listen to anybody. I mean, he's met with some of the most controversial people that will come to Mar-a-Lago and say, "Yeah, I'll sit down and talk to you. What do you have to say?" And then he'll get heat for it afterwards. Like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I just had a conversation with a guy. I just had breakfast with a guy. I just had a meeting with a guy." So I do like that about him a lot. Last thing I'll ask you before we wrap up: what is one storyline that influencers, podcasters, content creators that's very popular, that does very, very well, that is extreme, by far not accurate, and has brain rotted a lot of people? What do you notice that you look at and say, what are you saying? That's a lazy position. And we all fall for a lot of different things at times, and you go do research, you're like, well, what was that all about? Why did I believe that for a year or 2 years or 3 years? And you try to snap out of it by taking a cold shower and reading books and hearing different arguments. But what's 1 or 2 ideas that you see spreading, you're like, that's a full-on lie and it's propaganda?
Well, on the one hand, probably the one which is most widespread at this point is the whole question of the Epstein files. And when you get to the far left, you have these obscenities of Trump is a rapist and a pedophile and he eats children, which is part of what created the environment around this latest assassination attempt, clearly. But it's also part of the MAGA movement, which is also heavily invested in this. And when you look at who the Epstein files has actually brought down. Brought down Peter Mandelson. They brought down Prince Andrew, no longer Prince Andrew, and so on. But this fixation that Donald Trump is somehow the beating heart of the Epstein files is extremely corrosive, because people who are just living in that world have literally stopped thinking. And that spans both the left and the right, obviously. The question of Epstein is his intelligence ties. You look at Mandelson. What was he feeding Epstein? Top financial information during the 2008 crisis and so on. So people who are completely fixated on the island are ignoring the fact that this is a much larger intelligence operation. And guess what? It actually is being dismantled. So I think this question of, I'm not going to support Donald Trump until I see people in handcuffs and the Epstein files and so on. They're really not paying attention to what the president is actually doing to bring down the structure that created Epstein. Sometimes I say, look, there were evil things of that same kind of quality in the Roman Empire. What was the solution for society? Put everybody who ever did that in Rome in handcuffs, or bring down the Roman Empire. And that's what I think the president is trying to do. And the other big one, of course, is the Israel question, which Tucker and Candace and the rest of these things have gotten onto. That's a longer question, but it's completely parallel to the British role in creating the Muslim Brotherhood. They created radical Zionism. Which is not Judaism, just like political Islam is not Islam. And that's a longer story. But, that has clearly, I see it those are the 2 things I get in the comments in my videos, from people who disagree the most, Israel and Epstein. And if you actually look more seriously at what is behind both of those, it takes you back to the same place that we're talking about, which is this British imperial system, a system which the president has taken down.
Got it. Yeah. Well, Susan, great having you on. Where can people find you? Is it the Promethean Action site?
Yeah, PrometheanAction.com. That's it. That's my latest video up there. And we have a YouTube channel, which you can link to through there, and a lot of other material, including background material on the Promethean Action website, including, if you want to go back to the website, we have an ebook on there under the toolkit, which is called Police Dossier. It is the British Who Murder Our Presidents. Very useful thing for people to read right now, because it goes through the history of Lincoln, McKinley, Kennedy, and the attempts on Trump. So
let's put that below. Robert, for Camp, both links. Susan, thank you for making the time to come on, and I look forward to our next conversation as more things will happen under Trump. I have a feeling there's going to be many more things happening that we'll probably invite you back to have a conversation with. In the meantime, keep creating great content. You got a lot of people thinking and looking for things they weren't looking for before. By the way, that video that's on there from 17 years ago, did you really have this YouTube channel 17 years ago?
we did. It was when we were still the Rouge Pack.
So this YouTube channel used to be called the Rouge Pack.
Right. So some of the history stuff. That's actually, that 1932 is a great history.
It really is. It really is. I was looking at it, I'm like, it's an hour and 40 minutes, but it was from 17 years ago. Yes. And that's, okay, very cool. Well, thank you, Susan. All the best to you. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Anytime. You know, this whole thing with Vitamin and PBD podcast started with Phone Me and Mario. That's it. And it grew today to, 15 million subscribers almost and 164 full-time employees. And that relationship where you watching us and supporting us wouldn't happen without you. But did you know 51% of you that watch the content are not subscribed to the channel? And it would mean the world to us if you could press that subscribe button and notification. Why? It allows us to grow, hire more, do bigger interviews, have a bigger team, and deliver a better product to you. So if you haven't yet, if you don't mind, press that subscribe button. It would mean the world to us. Thank you so much.
All right. So, shout out to PBD. Always awesome. Always awesome. I appreciate you. You inspired me to be what I am in many ways. So yes, you are appreciated out here in this world. There's not many examples. There's not many men out there that could say that they have actually achieved the American dream, and I appreciate you. That was a great interview. A lot of people, you need to start opening up your mind, A lot of people have it closed, but the world's shifting now, man. Everybody's starting to wake up slowly, but it's starting to get, the kids are not falling for the dumb stuff. They're way too smart. They're outsmarting us in a lot of areas. I feel like the way they are going to do things here shortly, a lot of older people are going to start working for people that are younger than them, and it's going to be an embarrassing situation until, we, like us as older people, we're the ones that are supposed to be taking over office and things like that, and getting ourselves ready for this retirement, things like that. If you're 30 plus, you're supposed to be focused on actual society, and this is our turn to actually foster in the younger people. So the people in our 20s aren't running up trying to jack us for our wallets. They're actually out there putting in that work. So that company you're trying to open up, they're hired at it. You feel me? So we need to start trying to go and do our petitions, go into our government, go to those meetings, and go to your city halls and stuff like that. Make sure we're trying to interact and try to figure out what programs they have or grants and whatnot for small business, so they'll want to make more of them. All right, and us as the Americans, the people ourselves, we're supposed to be doing this. The ones that are like 30 plus, we're supposed to be doing this, so our kids will be like, oh yeah, that's how you do it. Yeah, we show them. We got to show them how to do it, but that means we have to do it. And that's pretty much where it's hurting. Yo, what up, Joe? I just saw that right now. But yeah, this was a good one. I was gonna call it. I'm not sure if Joe's still here. My bad, bro. I was just, I got done with that right there. Shit, I'm pretty much ready to go lay down. I mean, I feel better for sure, but I'm still kind of sick. I've been at it. But I'm about to get myself out of here. Shout out to Joe Cool, everybody. And yeah, I gotta kick my own ass today. I'm on the schedule. Yup. Getting my ass out.
Get ready. I say tonight, members of Congress, the state of our union is strong. Our country is winning again. In fact, we're winning so much that we really don't know what to do about it. People are asking me, please, 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 Mr. President, we're winning too much. We can't take it anymore. We're not used to winning in our country. Until you came along, we're just always losing, but now we're winning too much. And I say, no, 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 you're going to win again. You're going to win big. You're going to win bigger than ever. And to prove that point, here with us tonight is a group of winners who just made the entire nation proud.
I got some questions I need to ask myself. Really need to ask myself. I just don't even know anymore. What do I really want to do? Where do I really want to go? Who do I really want to be? Man. Yo. What do I really want to do? Where do I really want to go? Who do I really want to be? Try to do the right thing all the time. I'm like a hero online. Shit, I come through, save lives all the time. Bust out with the heels and now everybody living life at full health. I'm on, bro. I'm getting that wealth and I'm trying to put everybody else on. I got the belt, the champion. Every time you see me running in the zone, playing in the game. Always in the zone, and when we got the home field, you know we insane. Shit, hit me on my phone, and you know I'm hopping on the next plane. You know what's up? Shit, let's hit 'em up. Party over here, then we party over there. Come back to the crib, kick it with the kids. That's just how I live. Family biz, huh? This is how we go. Back and back and forth from coast to coast. This is how we go. Back and back and coast to coast. This is how we go. All over your city. Going back to back and we coast to coast. All over your city. Zoom, zoom, zoom with my broom, broom, broom. Got a new one of those neat. Damn, oh shit, it's neat. Damn, you neat. Damn, it's neat. Unique, neat, chic. Oh shit, that nigga complete. Never see defeat. Then I'll erase a nigga, delete. Gone. Run this shit all day like track meet, boy. You know we be doing this shit. Back at home, was all legit. Everybody so fitted up and we be sick. Listening like diamonds, a motherfucking trick. Yeah, we ain't even got a trick, know what I'm saying? But it's like a magician, straight illusion. Nah, nigga losing, straight cruising in my zoomer, nigga. Yeah, I'm pushing, zooming through the traffic, bobbing and weaving, attacking, knocking niggas, no sleeves. Damn, how you act? It's too high in this bitch, let's get it cracking. Arizona, yeah, checks, you already know. You know we on them, who's next? Everybody in a row, straight Q shot. Oh my god, nigga, yeah, you lose a lot. 50 cal, long shot. Oh damn, heart stop when a nigga go blam blam. I don't give a fuck, brains everywhere, going ham. Oh, what do I really wanna do? Where do I really wanna go? Who do I really wanna be? Man, what do I really wanna do? Where do I really wanna go? Who do I really wanna be? Man, shit. You already knew that. Brand new entertainment.
Shit exclusive.
My little homegirl put me on. She said, this shit brand new, free flow. Lately rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh? forgot about that part. Lately rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh, you forgot about that part. Lately rappers been spitting like they ain't got a heart. Because when I step to the game, I rip that shit apart. My evolution with the Gyarados from Magic Carp, and I ain't finished shopping till the whole world is in my cart. When you fucking with me, you choose a role and play your part.
If you do not want to change,
smart,
if you do not want to better yourself, if you do not want to break
the universe, keep doing shitty cards. I'm trying as hard as I can against all of the odds. Pushing as hard as I could is what got me so far. But what are my chances of actually reaching the stars? Still, I will never get up tatted over my heart. Never my sessions hiding in my weed up in the jar. Sexy Middle Eastern looking ass like I'm Jafar. When it comes to the game, I'm an eagle. You're
don't want to understand. If you are not here
catch you off guard while you chilling in the crib, got your chick in my car.
That's outside of your own mind, and accept others' minds and opinions, the way they think for themselves.
Like fuel to the game, watch it spark. My lines burn like blunts getting smoked in the car. Hella cooking shit up. If your ass wanna spar, barbecue your beef up like seats in my car. Cool yourself off refrigerator jar.
You do not belong here. Negativity, hate, disrespect, name calling, those things will not be allowed here on this platform, and not in this empire. We are the ones, the true Americans, that want to be free and stand as we have always stood.
Brand new free flow, lady rap.